Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our second annual Appalachia Gathering for Recovery Solutions. We had a wonderful time last year, and a lot of people are still making connections from last year. And we are hoping, I won't say hoping, I'll say expecting to have a wonderful time today as well. We have so many good speakers, we have so many good connections, and please enjoy yourself today. My name is Dr. Kathy Walzak. I'm one of the co-presenters today, and I'd like to welcome you all to Union College and welcome you all to the Appalachia Gathering. As you notice, we've chosen to use the word Appalachia Gathering as opposed to conference because what we looked at, we want to make sure that everybody is welcome and it's not just kind of an academic exercise. We want community people, we want law enforcement, we want basically everybody who is here today. One of the areas that we've been blessed with in Appalachia, we have had a lot of monies coming in. And one of the things that we've noticed in the area is that there has been a lot of what we are calling kind of the silos, that we have the money and we use it to do our own thing rather than kind of looking around to see what everybody else is doing. One of the things that we're looking at today and last Appalachia Gathering is to make those connections, make those pathways to see what each person is doing. And so use today to make those pathways, use today to make those connections, and enjoy good food, good fellowship, good connections. We have just a few housekeeping things. We have our food out front. Garbage cans are over to the side. We have our bathrooms over here, which is just right up and to your right. And we have many displays here. So please enjoy our vendors and see what they are offering. And please go outside, and there is the Kentucky State Police exhibit as well. So please let me know if you have any questions. Again, my name is Dr. Kathy Walzak, and right now I am going to introduce our president of Union College, Dr. Marcia Hawkins, and she's going to provide our welcome as well.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Walzak. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, what a beautiful morning. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Knox County, to Barberville, and to Union College campus. We are so proud to have you all here for the second year in a row. So much good work has come out of the first gathering, so many connections made in the first gathering, and we anticipate that this will continue. You've started something, and it's amazing. You know, one of the reasons we love to have you all here is it speaks to our mission. You know, part of our mission says that we will support the health and economic growth of our region. And so through things like this, through our substance abuse program, through all of the kinds of things we do on campus for our students, training students to work with recovery issues. That's what we do. That's part of our mission, and we feel very strongly about it. So if you think of anything else we should be doing, let us know. Let Dr. Walzak know, and we'll make it happen. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you around campus. Thank you. Okay. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Gail Manchin, Federal Co-Chair of the Appalachian Regional Commission. While I am sorry I cannot be with you today in Barberville, I'm so glad ARC's Health Manager Lauren Wood has joined you for this valuable exchange of ideas. All of you gathered today know just how much of an impact substance use disorder continues to have on our Appalachian community. How much of a stigma still exists when talking about the people it affects. So the reality is that now, more than ever, we need to confront the substance use disorder epidemic head on. Because substance abuse disorder is a community and regional problem, we must recognize that it calls for a collaborative solution. Employers need to take a chance on hiring employees in recovery. Law enforcement must look toward recovery options, and we must take a far greater regional approach. The work you do can't stop at your county or state borders, because the substance use disorder epidemic doesn't stop at any borders. We must be willing to think and work regionally to brainstorm solutions, share best practices, and support our Appalachian neighbors for the long haul. Because we have learned recovery is not a singular event. It is a continuum. That is why ARC launched Inspire, our Recovery to Work grant initiative in 2021 to help address these issues. And while I could tell you about the impact Inspire is having, a picture is worth 1,000 words.
Inspire is really enhancing the recovery to work piece. It's all about people stepping up to the plate and inspiring others to do so. We have to do it together. We're stronger together. We won't be able to just do it as treatment centers. We can't just do it as the economic development entities. Everybody has to come together, you dig? Because one commonality that we have is everybody is being impacted by it right now.
The impact substance abuse has on our community is very large. It was very significant before the pandemic, and after the pandemic even more so. The CDC just released their numbers, and we're over 93,000 overdose deaths for 2020. To me, that's a pandemic within a pandemic. It's very important that we even push harder on this issue, and we feel like one of the key pieces is getting that transportation, housing, and workforce. It's about substance use treatment, it's about workforce development, and it's about employment.
Because a person in recovery, there's different things they need. That goes back to the ecosystem. So with Inspire, we're looking to inspire other stakeholders to join us at the table to be a part of the ecosystem. And we also want to destigmatize.
To date, ARC has invested $28.1 million into 84 recovery to work projects through the Inspire grant. Those projects have provided services to more than 1,500 employees in job training. That's just the beginning. As we know, there is still work to do. ARC has released the request for proposal for our 4th round of Inspire funding last month. The final applications are due March 17th. To learn more, visit arc.gov/SUD. We are also committed to partnering with federal agencies. We are currently working with the Office of National Drug Control Policy to finalize a recovery-ready workplace toolkit. This toolkit is designed to help public and private employers respond more effectively to substance use among prospective and current employees. We also recognize the positive work happening at the state level to combat substance use disorder. As states across the region begin to receive millions in opioid settlement funds, we are starting to see their respective abatement council and authorities craft effective plans to disperse those funds in communities most in need. For example, in Kentucky, the state will be receiving $842 million from these settlement funds. Half of these will be allocated by the State Advisory Commission, with the other half going directly to cities and counties for substance use disorder treatment, prevention, and recovery efforts. In my travels, I've seen firsthand that the work being done by organizations just like yours is truly changing lives across Appalachia. In Eastern Kentucky, the organization FAHE is using a $500,000 Inspire grant to establish 2 recovery to work programs, Housing Development Alliance in Hazard and Homes Incorporated in Whitesburg, are training those in recovery in construction skills, which can build up their communities. This program is particularly well-timed as catastrophic flooding in the region has only made the area's dire need for housing more apparent. When Fahey's Inspire grant was announced, their Senior Vice President, Pam Johnson, said this: "People in recovery want a chance to give back to their communities." I believe this really exemplifies that when communities invest in people, they will get that investment back tenfold. I believe in organizations like yours. I believe in your ability to change Appalachia for the better by decreasing the stigma associated with substance use disorder while helping our people get back on their feet. I look forward to all the positive impacts we can have on Appalachia together by thinking not as 13 states, but as one united Appalachian region. I know you will have a wonderful conference, learning and sharing together. Thank you.
That was a wonderful message, and we certainly will, when we invest in people, get it back tenfold. So I would like to go ahead and we are not only looking at the Appalachia region, but we also have a message from our people who are joining us in Guadalajara. And let me just read through what they sent to us. Conference greetings from Guadalajara, Jalisco, Mexico. Greetings to the Appalachia Gathering for Recovery Solutions from the Guadalajara, Mexico Center for Integration of Youth at the University of Guadalajara. Our center and service to addicted youth was initiated by a concerned mother 50 years ago. Our center is part of a national public-private network in every state of Mexico, which seeks to confront addiction by providing treatment and support to Mexican youth. We appreciate our long-term relationship and assistance from America's service organizations such as Rotary Clubs International, and we look forward to attending your important conference at Union College today. They're joining us by teams today, and we look forward to using the valuable experience and information you share today in our efforts to seek solutions to the serious problems and consequences of addiction confronting Mexican youth. Christina Paz, Director, Psychiatrist, Chief of Medicine, and Dr. Edgar Jalenta. So we have not only our Appalachia region, but we also have some international international guests as well. We welcome them. Okay, Nancy, did you want to say welcome?
So you know how welcome you are when you have 4 people who are welcoming you. And it's good to see you, Dr. Al. It's always good to see you. Before I share a few things with you, I do want to let you know that how honored I am to be here with 2 men who have had a huge impact on my family's life. 20 years ago, there were 2 parents from Rockcastle County, Kentucky, who traveled to Statesboro, Georgia, to Willing Way Hospital. Scared parents, not knowing what to do, feeling like they were the only parents in the world who had learned that their son was suffering from a terrible disease. And it was sitting there in the office of Willing Way Hospital with Moonies all around us, advising us and guiding us, that we heard about a congressman in Kentucky who we dearly love, Hal Rogers, who was going to attack this problem head on and was going to find a solution and was going to prevent and was going to arrest the bad apples, and that was Congressman Hal Rogers. And we learned about this program that he was going to call Operation Unite, sitting at Willingway Hospital with Dr. Al Mooney and his sister and his brothers and those people who were caring for our son. So they will forever be a part of our family, Al. And then Tim Robinson, 8 years ago, I sat in the conference room at Big Sandy Ad in Prestonsburg and met this young man who was sitting across from me, heard his testimony, and that was the first time that I had heard full continuum of care. And Tim seeing the need and the vision for providing for the mind, the body, and the spirit. And the rest is history, so to speak. I just want the two of you all to know how much I appreciate and love both of you. We know what the problem is. We can't ever forget what has brought us here today, why we are here, why we are looking for solutions. Appalachia has been the epicenter for the addiction crisis. We all know that. But we are also leading the charge in finding solutions. Dr. Robert DuPont, who was the first director of the National Institute of Drug Abuse and the second White House drug czar, said this: "The country is being led from Appalachia." Out of Unite has come a national movement. The Prescription Drug and Illicit Drug Summit is a coming together. That's a gathering, you all. That's what we're doing here. Coming together that is going to make a huge difference. What we do, what we have done in Appalachia, impacts the rest of this country. We are the leaders in this. So why are we here today? Yes, to find solutions, but we've got to look at what's happening today. Fatal drug overdoses in Kentucky rose 15% last year. 2,250 people in Kentucky, our brothers, our sisters, they died, and nearly 70% of those involved fentanyl in their deaths. The highest number of deaths of those 2,250 Kentuckians occurred in the ages 35 to 44. Prime time in their lives. My nephew was one of those. 672 Kentuckians lost their lives because of fentanyl. The DEA seized more than 379 million potentially fatal doses of illicit fentanyl in 2022, enough to have killed every person in the United States. Why are we here today? Teen overdose deaths have risen since 2019. The recent report by the CDC shows that the monthly overdose deaths for teenagers involving fentanyl rose 182%. Hello? Is that not a wake-up call? Is that not a wake-up call to families, to communities, to educators, to policymakers? That's why we're here today. Congressman Rogers saw this storm coming a long time ago. Many people did not listen to him then. For some, we listened, but we didn't really hear. The predictions just chilled our spines, jolted our complacency, but we did not listen. And then the disaster was not only at our doorstep, it came into our homes. But there was a lifeline, hope. The hope of recovery, the hope of community, the hope of gathering together, the hope of solutions. We have been able to cross county lines, which is unheard of in Appalachia, especially with sports. We've been able to cross county lines. We've been able to cross state lines to find the hope that's found in the solutions. Desmond Tutu said, "Do your little bit of good where you are." It's those little bits of good put together that overwhelm the world. And that's what we're doing in Appalachia. So my challenge for you all is that we continue to put our bits of good together and find solutions for this problem. Thank you all.
Thank you, Nancy. That was sobering statistics, definitely. Okay, well, I want to take the time now to introduce our first speaker. And I'm not going to do a long introduction or anything because I know that that will be part of his presentation. But we have with us today Tim Robinson, CEO and founder of Addiction Recovery Care, which operates a network of 30 addiction treatment centers in Eastern and Central Kentucky, based in Lusa. The organization offers a continuum of care, including centers for detox, residential, transitional, IOP, outpatient, MAT, vocational rehabilitation, and job training. The treatment addictionologist and spirituality emphasis that the 12-step program and the continuum of care. So let me take the time now and introduce Mr. Tim Robinson.
Had to check my clicker. My wife asked me sometimes I'm nervous to speak, and I said the clicker makes me more nervous than anything. If I lose my notes, then I may not have a whole lot to say. But then she quickly says, "No, I've never known you not to have something to say." So it's good to be with you today. Looking across the room and seeing logos on shirts and folks around the room that I recognize. When we gather in Eastern Kentucky and we talk about substance use disorder, it's like gathering up people who are taking a little time to come together out of what I call laboratories of transformation. And Nancy talked some about that in her talk, and that's what we're doing in Eastern Kentucky. We may have the worst drug problem or had the worst drug problem in America, and that's not something you want to be number one in. But I believe that we're also the center of solutions, and that's not just hopeful thinking. That's what the data shows. That's what policy experts say. And Nancy mentioned this, but anything great that ever happens is always built on foundations that's been laid before that work. And for us, our foundations were laid by Operation Unite. That got started this spring 20 years ago, when that same congressman she mentioned gathered people to talk about this problem. And he'd already been thinking about this, but it especially came to the forefront when there was an article by Billy Stepp on the front page of the Lexington Herald Leader that called Eastern Kentucky the pain pill capital of the world. And that put that in motion. And now we are here 20 years later, and let's look at what's happened. We got started because we had some resources in the first in the nation recovery voucher program before health insurance, way before health insurance ever started covering residential treatment. And so in these 20 years, we're now number one in Kentucky in the nation in residential treatment beds, number one in the whole country. And you're sitting in the congressional district that's the number one congressional district in the country in terms of access to treatment. The University of Chicago's North Center for Public Policy pre-pandemic, they studied declines in overdoses across the country and looked at that data. It's not anecdotal observation, but University of Chicago's research center at Newark is one of the highest reputation groups in the country. And they said pre-pandemic, in looking at a 5-year period, 8 of the 10 counties in the nation that made the most progress were in Eastern Kentucky, 8 out of the top 10. Not only that, there was no congressional district that even come close with making progress. Now, I'll talk a little bit about today. The pandemic has changed some of that, and fentanyl has changed some of that. But what that data shows me is that Eastern Kentucky, we're very capable of looking at our own problems and coming together and start fixing those problems. I'm not saying we've not had some help externally, but the leadership of what's happened in Eastern Kentucky is born and bred right here in the mountains, in a place that I believe has the most capable people anywhere, and people that when they are determined, they can put on their boots and go under a coal mine and risk their lives every day to feed their family. They can be a region that steps up when our nation is at war and volunteers at rates higher than any other place to serve their country. And I think on this issue, we're stepping up on this issue to say we're going to take care of our neighbors. And I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to talk a little bit about this also, is I think what's driving what's happening in Eastern Kentucky is the faith of our region. And I believe when I look around this room, I see answers to prayers. Everything that I do every day is coming out of prayers that I know are being answered with moms like Nancy and dads like John and spouses and others who have seen the devastation of what this has done, that are praying, and those prayers are being answered. And that's what I see when I look across this room, is answers to those prayers. And so thank you for the work that you do. Every bit of it matters. I'm for it all, and we need it all, because it's not a small problem, and we need what everybody in this room is doing. Clicker's working. Give you a real quick timeline. We got started in 2006. I was a fall down drunk. I was also a prosecutor, a court bailiff who was also a pastor, built a relationship with me, led me to a spiritual awakening at my desk in the county attorney's office, and that day changed everything for me. And shortly after that, I actually met my wife in a court diversion program, one of the first ones in our state, called the SAFE program. Her mom was a volunteer because her dad had been an alcoholic, and my mother-in-law introduced me to my wife at a SAFE meeting. So the greatest person in my life came on a Tuesday night. I met her when we were doing a court diversion program. Just as a side note, my mother-in-law can't complain about me because she introduced me to that daughter. 2 years later, I resigned as a prosecutor because when I got saved, when I had a spiritual awakening, my court docket no longer was those people. As I realized the reality of my own alcoholism, it became us instead of them. And there's something about when the Spirit starts moving in you that you see dignity in other people differently than the eyes before we have that. And so in 2008, I resigned as prosecutor, stopped practicing law, started grassroots ministry for those suffering with substance use disorder. If sometimes you think not in my backyard problems are bad in these seasons, you should try to open up a recovery center in 2010. We were sued at least 3 times. We had votes of no confidence, and in the town who completely rejected us there, we're now the largest employer in Lawrence County, Kentucky. We have 500 employees. We're the largest private employer. So God had a plan for Lawrence County, whether or not they even wanted it at the time. And now we're the only county in Central Appalachia that had economic growth. And I know, let me say this way, that had a population growth in the last census, the only one in Central Appalachia, driven by economic opportunities by people that are recovering from addiction. 2015, we admitted the very first Medicaid residential treatment client in Kentucky. 2016, a big turning point. I'll talk a little bit more about this. We launched our first vocational training program called the Peer Support Academy. It changed everything about treatment motivation. When we launched that, we didn't even do signups. I announced that we're going to start a college program with Sullivan University where you could earn college credit while you were becoming a peer support specialist. And our demand for phase 2 treatment immediately doubled. It took us almost a year to open up enough next step beds when we made that announcement. Matter of fact, there's a girl who was getting ready to leave Karen's place because she was discouraged, and she had been there about 8 months. She was getting ready to leave. I was there on a tour and talked about it. She decided to stay to do the Peer Support Academy, and now she's on the other end of the hall where I'm at, and now vice president at ARC, because of the power of what opportunity can mean. Today, some of the things that's happened is we opened the largest treatment center in the country in Springfield, Kentucky. We're servicing there on campus. We've got capacity to do 750. We actually don't have 750. We're more around 600. And I'll talk a little bit more about why, because there was a huge opportunity that came up that allowed us to repurpose part of that campus. So now we have programs. Around Kentucky, 30-some treatment programs. One of the things you'll notice is we've tried to take care of Eastern Kentucky and put facilities here, and felt responsible to do that in places like Owsley County, that's in some years the poorest county in the nation. I was there visiting yesterday. We have a 60-bed facility in Owsley County, and we're training carpenters and hopefully going to have some of those carpenters that are going to help rebuild Eastern Kentucky in the coming months. We've treated over 50,000 individuals since opening our doors. We've been just in Kentucky up to now, as you see, a lot of Eastern Kentucky and Central Kentucky, but we're getting ready to open this year in Owensboro. We're getting ready to open in Louisville. We have facilities opening in Northern Kentucky and site selections going on. So it won't be long that we'll be across the state of Kentucky. And then our neighbors to Virginia saw what was happening in Eastern Kentucky and saw the data and asked themselves what's happening in Eastern Kentucky with the progress. And they come knocking on our doors and said, we want to bring ARC to Virginia. And now they have invested almost $7 million in economic development incentives for us to start building treatment facilities. And there's not a whole lot of difference between Southwestern Virginia and Eastern Kentucky. Not 50 cents difference in the two areas. But they have no access to treatment there compared to what we have. And so we're already used to helping folks in rural areas. We've built what we believe is world-class treatment and recovery programs in poor rural areas, and going into Western and Southwestern Virginia. Those neighbors that will be able to help are not going to be a whole lot different, and all talk the way we do too. So most people in here, this is not an audience that's got a compassion problem or what I call a dignity deficit. But if you're here because somebody just suggested you go, or maybe you're an employer thinking about second chance employment, let me give you this. And if you are a person that knows this instinctively, we all hear, right? Can't find workers because nobody can pass the drug screen. We all hear that, right? We think that must be a big part of the problem. Let me give you a little insight in why I know that we're going to get the resources we need in addiction treatment and recovery. The resources are increasing, and they're going to continue to increase. And I believe this is one of the reasons why. is if we don't circle back for our neighbors, we're going to have an economic collapse if we don't circle back. A democratic republic's the greatest form of government that's ever been formed. But if you read all of the cautions about a democratic republic and free market capitalism, which I am a great proponent of, right in the cautions is you better always circle back. You always better circle back for the ones in the system that need some extra help to be able to participate and live in those days talking about the future American dream. And so I think we're going to circle back. I think it's happening, and I think the conversations are changing. I think that we've been sold some silver bullets that actually ended up not being silver bullets. And I think people are tired of waiting on silver bullets. We need everything. We need every tool. We need everything. But I think when we look at the addiction problem, it's like a balloon. You push in on opiates and meth pops out. You push in on meth and then alcohol use is going to go up. So we have this huge demand problem. And the only way that we're going to change this demand problem is invest in our neighbors and circle back from them. And that's not going to be just one silo doing one piece. It's going to take it all. So let me give you some workforce numbers here. Where have all the workers gone? Brookings Institute. Increase in opioid prescriptions from 99 to 2015 could account for 43% of the observed decline in men's labor force participation in that period, and 25% of the women's labor participation. A 10% increase in the amount of opioids prescribed per capita in a county is associated with a 1% increase in the share of individuals who report taking the pain medication. Ohio State, which does a lot of great work on looking at the practical side of addiction, they're, to me, the leading university in Appalachia, in the Appalachian region on these issues, is Ohio State University, because they look at these issues from this lens. They said that when they studied the biggest hole in our workforce, half of prime age men 25 to 55 took pain medication every single day. So it's the biggest hole we have in our workforce is prime age working men 25 to 55. Half of them are taking pain meds in a self-reported study. So we know we don't do a good job telling on ourselves, right? From kindergarten on, we don't do a good job telling on ourselves. I know my 4 kids don't. So here's the underlying culprit is only 2/3 of them had a script. So 1/6 of your workforce participation problem, people were buying their pain meds, they were buying their oxycodone on the street. Most of you ASAM experts in here know that when we start looking at when something becomes an issue to eventually becoming a substance use disorder, when we're buying drugs on the street because we no longer can get a script. All you professionals in here know that that's because people have a substance use disorder. The ones that are telling on themselves. So if these numbers are 20% more, it could be instead of 1/6 of our workforce problem, it could be a third of our overall workforce problem. It could be as much as half of our workforce problem. That's why I believe this issue is why the resources are coming. I believe the resources is coming because in Kentucky, we figured that out. We're blessed with the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce who have figured this out a few years ago. They've launched the first in the nation effort across the state with the Fair Chance Academy that's helping employers become fair chance employers. And they are doing trainings, they are doing recruitment, and they get this, they understand this, that this is why this issue is so important. So this has been a message that we've been talking about for a while. got to go a few years ago and give congressional testimony. And I talked about access to treatment and I talked about second chance employment. And that those two things had to be a part of our future strategy. You can change a lot of the other details. Is it residential? Is it MAT? Is it recovery housing? Is it counseling? Is it peer support? Is it 12 steps? Yes, 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 it's all that. But at the heart of it all is going to have to be access to all those things. And how do we then get economic opportunity back for our neighbors? And in some cases, you're not getting it back because 20 years later, we're in the third generation. We've actually treated 4 generations in our facilities. Great-grandma, grandma, mom, and daughter. We've had 4 generations in our facility before. And so now we're not dealing with the same folks that were coming in our doors 20 years ago or 12 years ago. And you can see it in our elementary schools. 60% up from 50% 10 years ago of elementary school age kids in Appalachia are being raised by neither biological parent. What are the 2 of the biggest risk factors for addiction? Rejection and abandonment. So we have no choice but to resource this and move these efforts forward. So one of the things that I mentioned is that we saw treatment motivation go up. And it happened immediately. And we at that time had some guys that had been in the field 20, 25 years already, and they'd never seen anything increase treatment motivation. And I've had people over the years say, you talk a lot about job training, what in the world does that got to do with clinical care? I don't know, I can't explain it to you. I'm a lawyer. I wasn't even a very good lawyer when I was a lawyer. I could only get up in court and do plea agreements and that sort of thing. I would have never let me do any paperwork in law. And that's how I separate a real lawyer from a not real lawyer. A real lawyer can do paperwork. I wasn't one of them guys. But when treatment motivation doubles, however you want to describe it, something happened. And so it also attacks the stigma that people in addiction like where they are, they don't want to work, they don't have the ability to contribute. And it really attacks something that really makes me mad is when everybody wants to assign low expectations to people in addiction. And a lot of policies sometimes actually reinforce dependence and reinforce hopelessness instead of looking at the reality, which is we see people who do a full continuum of care that will complete our crisis to career model. 80% of them get better. 80% of them return to work. 80% of them are still functioning a year out, 2 years out. We've got people now that are 60 months out that have went through the vocational rehabilitation and job training. And again, those aren't just anecdotal numbers. We were actually selected by HHS as a national best practice in taking people from a crisis, mental health, or addiction and putting them back in the workforce. That data is still being collected. COVID interrupted it, but the data is still being collected by HHS. And in fact, the U.S. Social Security Administration selected us to be the participant in that study that they were focused on because we were doing it at such scale. And so we're going to soon have that data. But the data, I tell you, it's about 80% that do a continuum of care remain in active recovery. So in our model over the years, we didn't start with this. We actually had a longer program, and then we shortened our program, and then we built it back. So phase 1 is that stabilization, detox, residential. Hopefully by the end of the year, we're going to reopen a psychiatric hospital. We purchased the Bellefonte Hospital campus. Psychiatric needs have exploded. I'll show you some data about that in a few minutes. But it's a huge, huge problem. So we're going to be able to do all aspects of stabilization. That's what you would know as residential treatment, partial hospitalization. From there, they go on to recovery and life skills, where we really start focusing on those recovery skills and self-help and start thinking about basic life skills. And when I say basic life skills, we got rid in one facility commercial washer and dryers. It was more efficient, but we had too many people that needed to be taught how to do laundry. And so now all of our facilities have the same kind of washer and dryer that you and I have at our home, because we had so many people that we had to teach basic skills. Now, I'm not trying to say that that's widespread, but there is a certain number of folks that we have to teach how to do laundry. So recovery and life skills. Phase 3 is what I call vocational rehabilitation. If you don't hear anything else that I have to say right now, hear this. Most re-entry programs fail because of a lack of vocational rehabilitation. Vocational rehabilitation is not treatment. It's not job training. It's not a minimum wage fast food job that gets you used to putting your shoes on and going to work. That's not vocational rehabilitation. What we found, there's about a 90-day period of time that there has to be intensive vocational rehabilitation that develops soft skills that everybody in this room here has, but a lot of our neighbors have either never had developed or they've lost. And that's where we spend a lot of effort, is in that vocational rehabilitation phase. Our phase 3 program is as important as any phase of what we do. And then from there, job skills and education. Why are these increments? Why are we looking at these increments? Because we've helped 50,000 people, and we've tried different durations. Getting somebody out of jail and putting them straight to work when they haven't in a while is a really tough obstacle. Walking somebody out of a 21-day detox program and say, we've got you a second chance employee, and it's the first time they've had a job in a long time, success isn't going to be likely in those cases. So that's phase 3. Phase 4 is actually job skills and education. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second with a sort of a case study of what I'm talking about. We have worked with community colleges. We've worked a lot with Sullivan University. And one of the things we found was that not only do people need job skills to be able to be engaged in meaningful employment, but they also need educational skills, basic skills. They need remedial math. They need remedial writing. We have 100 and some people this morning that are in a GED program in our facilities. Our best GED tutors are people who've gotten their GEDs. We have routinely people who can't read and write who will be taught to read and write by a fellow client that will then be tutored to get their GED by another client who's a little farther in the program that got their GED. And so it's tough. And I hear examples of, we're going to start college for somebody the moment they get done with residential treatment. This could work in maybe a few cases, but the reality is, just like they need vocational rehabilitation, they need wraparound during the educational piece too. And so our job training programs are not meant to replace what's happening in higher education. It's to rehabilitate someone's skill set to be a student, so then they can engage in educational career paths. And the other thing is that we have to be able to, along with that, we have to be able to give them the ability to make a living in the interim while they're moving toward being something. You can tour, I go in my facilities right now, in a room this size. How many of y'all want to do an addiction treatment field? Half the people in the room will raise their hands. How many of you in here want to be a alcohol drug counselor? Probably a third of them raise their hands. There's a great demand for those folks. There's a great interest, but there's steps to get there. And it's tough to go from being in and out of prison and being houseless to 60 days later enrolling in classes at Union College to start to study to be a counselor. And so what we're doing with the training program side of what we're doing is getting them ready to be able to get a career that they can make a living wage, so they're not going back to petty drug deals, that they can support themselves, but then have a career path. You won't find art clients, and this is not critical for anybody in the room, I'm not directing this. You won't see us out picking up trash. You won't see us doing contract work that doesn't lead to a career. Anything that they're doing in our buildings is leading to a career and giving them dignity with the hope of a career. So this April, our training programs that we started in 2016 grew up into state licensed training programs, and this April will actually be accredited and be able to award college credit. So we'll be able to work with Union College or Moorhead and get somebody ready to be a college student, get 6 months of treatment or 6 months of education, give them a certificate, 25 to 30 college credit, quarter credit hours, basically a certificate that they can then, at that point, they know how to be an online student, they know how to study, they've got basic writing skills. So we're actually rehabilitating their ability to then engage in higher ed. So when they get to Union or Moorhead or community college, they're able to do that. And that's what we try to get them to be thinking about is, you know, one of these days, when you step outside of what we're doing with these wraparound services, there's a big world out there and there's a lot of opportunity for you. Let's get this piece done and then build on it. So talked about, this is a dream that we had for a while and we finally found an employer ready to do it. I've been a voice for a long time about cohort fair chance employment or second chance employment, where you have an employer that has a labor shortage, and because of their labor shortage, their compassion level can go up because they're desperate, and they'll make some concessions they may not normally make, like looking at criminal background checks and those sorts of things. So for a long time, I felt like the cohort training programs attached to employers that had jobs would be a great way to prove out the concept of fair chance employment. So when we got to Springfield at St. Catherine's College, the largest employer in town was Toyota Tommy. They do a lot of aftermarket parts for Toyota, but the biggest thing they do is they make 90% of the sunroofs in the United States. If you're in here, you got a sunroof, most likely Toyota Tommy made that, and probably within the next couple of years, there's a good chance a former ARC client probably touched that sunroof when it goes in your car. Toyota Tommy connected with us. They were down 65 workers. They were bringing welders from Japan and paying people to move from Japan and paying them in temporary housing from Japan because they couldn't find workers. Kentucky Chamber, in partnership with Van Ingram and Office of Drug Control Policy, created Fair Chance Employment Academy. They went through that. They became a quick and eager student to learn all about that. In January 21, we started a workforce program. We tried that, we looked at that, and we ended up looking at going part-time. Most of their jobs, you got to be able to weld. So if you can stand to be around sparks, it kind of freaks me out. I'm convinced it's going to burn me or put my eye out. So if you're not like me and you're kind of mechanically inclined and you can be around sparks and not get freaked out, then in that trial period, we can help you do that. And you're living in transitional housing, and then eventually you can become a full-time employee. And not that it's not a great place to work, because our folks are getting, $20+ an hour for those jobs. Like they're really good jobs. And then if you get that on your resume, you could go work for Main Toyota, and then that job goes to $75,000, $80,000. Or the battery plant that's coming in Hardin County. And so this is working the way we imagined it. It's actually working better than what we thought it would in terms of retention. They actually retain more of our folks in employment than they do folks off the street, which doesn't surprise me because the folks off the street, there's probably a big percentage of them have an SUD that's not been managed. So today they employ over 20 art graduates. They love the wraparound services, and so this is actually also growing in to, they're actually going to stay with us in a staffing capacity where we can manage their EAP program for a certain period of time, even while they're in the factory. The other thing that does is it lowers employers' perceived liabilities. So this is happening. 40% of their 500 employees need to know how to weld. So we've launched a welding school in Louisa. It's a 6-month welding training program. We have 16 people right now learning to weld. They get certification. They're actually overqualified for Toyota Tommy, but if they don't stay at Toyota Tommy, they can go anywhere. They ended up with 3 different welding certifications. There's been such a success with that we're going to be moving to 32 welding school spots by fall. We're right now working on staffing a second shift of training. In addition to that, there's been some governments that have heard about this, and we're in talks right now to put a talent pipeline recovery workforce housing program on site at an industrial park. And we're actually talking to 2 different county governments about what it would look like to put a transitional housing community in an industrial park. So the employers will have ready access. I think it's going to be one of the crown jewels of our future Eastern Kentucky economic development, which is going to be to have a recovered workforce. If we have more treatment centers than anywhere, we're going to have more people in recovery than anywhere. And if we can get them the skills they need, we're going to have more ready workers than anywhere. And we already know the coal miners of Eastern Kentucky are the hardest working people on the planet, and they've raised generations that do the same. And so we have the work ethic, we have all those things. We just got to get their kids and grandkids that are right now in addiction. We need to get them back in the game. So I'm for it all. I'm for MAT. I'm for residential. I'm for medical's role, clinical role, 12 steps, Oxford House. I'm for it all. If you're in here and you're doing it, I'm for you. But we need the people beside you too. And we can continue to waste time on trying to say this is going to work or that's going to work. We need it all. It's too big a problem. We need everybody helping. But some of the things that I know we need are housing, job training, education, employment, childcare, transportation, and of course access to healthcare. And we call these social determinants of recovery. We need all these things. One of the big needs, and I think this is one of the next things, if we're going to stay a national leader in Kentucky, is we have to also be one of the first states that do recovery housing. That also means we're going to have to realize that there's going to have to be standards, because in order to have funding for recovery housing, there has to be standards. You know, there's a lot of controversy in towns over halfway houses that are unregulated, that are not part of a responsible organization like an Oxford House that's got oversight. It's a big problem. It's a growing problem. And so we do need recovery housing, but it's going to have to be regulated because that's the only way there's going to be support for it, and it's needed. But it's going to have to be resourced, and it's going to have to be professionally operated. And we've got some great pilots, one of which is a program funded by the Kentucky Opioid Response Effort that's managed by Operation Unite, that took the same things we learned about how important vouchers were for extending care, and how that's now even extends the traditional Unite voucher program, extends care or gives opportunities for people who don't have insurance. But what we did with the treatment voucher is we were able to extend care the whole time someone is in an IOP level of care. And that program has worked great. And we've gotten a lot of good data and a lot of good success in what that means to extend care. And let me just say this too, some people say, well, housing people and extending care, that's expensive. Well, everything else that we're doing is failing is a lot more expensive. And it costs us a whole lot more. in incarceration and social services and entitlement programs with no hope of getting past some of those programs because of basically underlying mental health issues and addiction issues. So it's a lot more expensive. And I can tell you that our problem has went from opioids to most months now meth. And we're talking about thousands of people, a data set of thousands of people, probably the largest data set in the state. And if you go back 6 or 7 years ago, meth was 5 or 6%. Now it's pushing 40. And if you break pain medications like oxycodone away from opioids, meth is by far our #1 drug of choice. You're not going to treat meth with medication only. You're not going to treat meth with a short-term state. It takes people 5 or 6 months to come out of meth psychosis if they've had long-term meth use. Matter of fact, we've had to, and I'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. Well, right here's the slide. Post-COVID, we have had an explosion of severe mental illness. We've had to build out our psychiatric offerings. One of the reasons we reopened the psychiatric hospital is because of this issue. And we are one of the few providers that say yes to SMI if it's disclosed. And we have built out a psychiatry department. We've got a lot of, we got psychiatric nurse pracs and psychiatrists on staff, which in Kentucky is very hard to find for this population. We're hopefully working on that issue as well to increase the number of providers in rural areas. This is a major issue. It's also why we got to be very careful about standards, very careful about what's the underlying issues. If you get somebody that's co-occurring, it's pretty tough to put them in a facility that doesn't have the ability to treat co-occurring. That can't. Yes, we can treat some underlying SUD, but if there's also an SMI, you're not going to have good success if you don't have this. And one of the things that's very tough with people in meth psychosis is it's tough for a little while to sort this out, to sort out what is the meth psychosis and then is there an SMI there. And so it's one of the reasons we've had to do so, and we're continuously adding psychiatric providers to what we're doing. We're also seeing an explosion of those that are houseless in our state, especially in our urban areas. You also see it in small towns. And I know a lot of folks in here, if there's providers get blamed for homelessness, we get blamed for it in our town. At any given time, we'll have 2 or 3 people that are living on the street. We know all their names, and most all of them are from Louisa, Kentucky, and our folks that went to school with them know them. And really, what's going on is there's an untreated SMI. There's an addiction issue too. But that's what's happening is post-COVID, and I'm not smart enough to understand all the reasons why, but all the mental health issues have been exacerbated and come to light. And I think we had a collapse of a lot of self-help things like, church and Celebrate Recovery and AA meetings and NA meetings, and a lot of the things that may have been keeping people a little more stable that collapsed, and that caused an exasperation. And so the SUD population, because of this, is more complex treatment. And so one of the things, and I'm not doing a commercial for us, but if you have people you're sending to treatment and you suspect an SMI, make sure that you get them somewhere that can treat that, because the outcomes are a whole lot better if somebody can do co-occurring. Got to keep strengthening our treatment and recovery infrastructure. I think vocational rehabilitation, job training is a part of that. Support all these different proven pathways to recovery. And we're going to have to increase quality standards across the board. And I'm a person that we've submitted ourselves to every type of accreditation that we could submit to. We're getting ready to go through hospital accreditation, and we're actually going to get some of our programs accredited with hospital standards that actually don't have to be, but we just believe it'll make us better. And so I think we need more quality standards, and we need we need to be able, people need to understand there's a difference between a hospital, residential treatment, a halfway house, because what happens is all treatment gets a bad name if somebody is advertising we're a treatment facility, and in fact they're a halfway house with outpatient counseling down the road, and they can't treat all these underlying issues. And so those are some of the standards we're going to have to see, or the whole treatment field is going to suffer without standards. And then of course emphasize long-term outcomes and pay for long-term outcomes, do value-based incentives for long-term outcomes. So I'm going to put my contact up there, and then I've got just a little bit more time. And so I've kind of overviewed to you our comprehensive side of things. And we have the clinical side of what we're doing. We have the vocational side. We have the medical, the psychiatric, the voc rehab. But let me just spend the last little bit of time talking about the spiritual side of what we're doing. And I know it's not always a comfortable topic for groups to talk about it from the spiritual side. Let me say this, is that spiritual doesn't mean that we don't make accommodations that give dignity to people of all faiths. Doesn't mean that we compel anybody to participate in the faith-based side of what we're doing in the programs that we're doing. But there's a void if there's not an opportunity for that. And so I've been doing this work a long time. We've helped over 50,000 of our neighbors with addiction. And we know this word in Eastern Kentucky well, and it's poverty. And I believe ultimately that's the issue we're dealing with, is poverty, and I don't mean economic poverty. I'm talking about spiritual poverty. And here's my observations. And now I'm switching from CEO of a drug and alcohol rehabilitation company to a person in recovery that celebrated 16 years last year, that's been able to sustain my recovery and that understands poverty from my own walk. And so when I say poverty, I'm talking about spiritual poverty. And here's what I found, is that poverty starts with fear. Poverty has rejection. Poverty leads to despair. Poverty leads to woundedness. Poverty leads to dysfunction, and poverty leads to self-centeredness. You can start in your mind thinking about folks that in your own life that struggle. These are things that frustrate us about other people. And normally when something frustrates us about other people, we're seeing parts of ourselves or where we've been. And so I think spiritual poverty's got to be a part of what we're talking about in this field. And for a long time, and I didn't even understand it when we made our slogan, Discover Destiny, Discover Your Destiny. Our mission statement is, we create opportunities for people to discover hope and live their God-given destiny. And so I've at times been accused of being obsessed with the word destiny, and I feel like God gives me more of an understanding about it all the time. And the only thing that replaces fear is dignity. The only thing that replaces rejection is kinship. The only thing that replaces despair is hope. The only thing that can help woundedness is healing. The only way that my dysfunction is going to improve is if somebody invests in me and equips me. In self-centeredness, the cure to it is purpose. And so the heart of what we're trying to do at ARC is replace spiritual poverty with spiritual destiny. And just suffer with me, you will, if my faith has a different text than yours. But in Luke 4, it says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he hath anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, to preach deliverance to the captives, and the recovering of sight to the blind, and to set at liberty them that are bruised, to preach the acceptable year of the Lord. I struggled a long time trying to think about destiny and really what's that mean. And I really found that scripture to be inspirational about what we mean when we say destiny. And I'm a bit of a nerd when it comes to studying things. I really wasn't on the law. I become a lawyer. I really wasn't a nerd on the law. But on things that I'm interested in and passionate about, I'm a nerd. So I took those scriptures from my faith and rewrote them in the, you have the King James Version, you have the Message version. This is the Tim Robinson version, the TRB. I am destined to God to be sent to you. Those that are cowering in fear, the brokenhearted, the captives, and the blind. I've come to replace your fear with faith, with dignity, your despair with hope, your woundedness with healing, your social deficits and dysfunction with equipping, and your self-centeredness with purpose. You are bruised and bound by a life of spiritual poverty, but I come to set you at liberty. Embrace this good news. Experience it for yourself and then share it with your neighbors. This is our mission, and together, you and me, our common destiny. And destiny has evolved for me of what that means and what we're trying to do at ARC. Today's definition is this: destiny is God's mission he shared with his creation. To discover him, to experience dignity, kinship, hope, healing, equipping, and purpose, and live these out by giving your life to helping others find and live their destiny. That sounds a whole lot about what the 12 Steps talks about what you have, give it away. So the heart of everything we're trying to do at ARC from a spiritual standpoint is to teach people that all the things you've been looking for in a pill bottle, in an alcohol bottle, in a syringe, all comes back to your destiny. It all comes back to, is your life going to be used to help other people find what you're finding and live it for themselves? Because that's what we're all looking for. Everybody in this room is looking for the joy that comes for that. The peace and the purpose. You can look at some of the most famous people in the history of our world. The worst thing happened to them. All their dreams came true, and they were left without this understanding of destiny. And they drunk and drugged themselves to death because all their dreams come true and destiny still wasn't there, so joy wasn't present. And you all know the names that I'm talking about, the Michael Jacksons, the Elvis Presleys, the Marilyn Monroes, people who are icons in the world who all their dreams come true, but they ended up dying in the same addictions that we're all fighting. And so I think the work that we all do starts with dignity, and I believe that's the greatest deficit we have right now in this issue. People use the word stigma. I say it's a deficit of dignity. Here's the TRV definition of that. It's the truth that human beings are created in God's image, giving them inherent value and worth because they're loved by him. And here's the lick, Tom Bassini. They have the capacity to share his love with the world. And yesterday at Carpenter's Village, I told the guys in the room, I said, there's such a capacity for love in this room. And a capacity that goes beyond all your mistakes, that your life can mean something to other people. And when you find that out, your life will mean something to you too. And kinship and giving people a place to belong, a family. That's what I found when I had my own faith awakening, is the kinship of being a part of a family. It's the embodiment and practice of being committed to one another, experiencing acceptance and belonging through social bonds and a spiritual relationship. That you would experience kinship with the people around you. And dignity drives you to seeing everybody as your neighbor. It drives you to that. It drives you in East Kentucky, where I'm from in Pigeon Roost, everybody's kin. And if you're kin, you're in. And so creating that kinship. Healing is a systematic and purposeful intervention to help another person focus on improving their spiritual, their physical, their mental, and their emotional well-being. That they find healing. And that takes all y'all, because y'all all got a part in that healing. Everybody in this room is engaged in healing. Equipping is to provide someone with what they need to find and fulfill their God-given purpose. That makes all the work we do, all of our work we do, have to strive for excellence. It has to be all in. Because our neighbors have needs, they have a lot of needs. And when we answer that call that they need equipping to get out of their dysfunction, then it changes what length we're willing to go to walk the second mile and the third mile. And then finally, and I get this back from Luke 4, is set at liberty. You think you get this phrase set at liberty. You think you see maybe a set of bolt cutters opening up a chain or breaking a chain. And when I read that scripture, set at liberty, that's the image that I got, is to break somebody out of jail. But it actually, what it means there in the Greek is God's original intent and a reason a person was created. So when the founder and pioneer of my faith said he come to set at liberty, he means to reestablish his original intent. And then destiny is us doing that for our neighbors. That we experience this in our own lives. We experience dignity, we experience kinship, we experience hope, we experience healing, we experience mentors. It's baseball season again in Tom's world, and there's a bunch of little Yankees that are getting poured into. Some kids that are probably in some families that maybe not have anybody is doing that for them this week. But what we can mean in the lives of other people when we just take a little bit to pour what we have into them, it don't just change them, it changes us. And then finally, that last part, and I got 1 minute, is purpose. And it's God's purpose for our lives. And that's what I look at when I look around this room, is a bunch of people, and you may not even realize it, you're living out God's purpose in your life. And our neighbors need you. And every day we're spent on their behalf gives us a little more of our own destiny. Thank you all for letting me talk to you, and thank you for the work you're doing.
Folks, we will go ahead and get started. So I want to welcome everybody to presentation I'm going to do today, Recovery Solutions, Treatment for Addiction, Trauma, and Co-occurring Disorders. A little bit about me. My name is Jeff Wilson. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and licensed clinical alcohol and drug counselor. And been practicing in the mental health and substance use treatment fields here in Kentucky since 1995. In a variety of different treatment environments. I started off in long-term residential treatment for adolescents, and we did that for a number of years. Inpatient treatment for adolescents and adults. I currently practice in Lexington, Kentucky. I work with adolescents who are struggling with co-occurring disorders, mental health, and substance use as well. And I really appreciate the panel for asking me to come back. I enjoyed presenting last year. And last year I kind of did more of a macro, global, what are we seeing in Appalachia related to suicide, substance use, alcohol-related liver disease. And this year I wanted to do something a little bit different, maybe a little bit more micro as far as looking at recovery solutions for individuals that we try to treat, that we try to help. And to give you a sense of what I want to try to cover with you all this morning, we're going to start off talking a little bit about adverse childhood experiences and trauma and the impact that has on folks, because I don't know about you all, but when I look at who presents for treatment, the level of trauma that people experience, I think is really significant. And then talk a little bit about the importance of recovery capital and what that is and why that's so important for our clients that we treat. Many, talking about trauma and substance use, we're talking about co-occurring disorders. So how can we be effective in helping our clients that present with co-occurring disorders? When you think about recovery and how we can support our clients, it's so prevalent, and it's a big piece of how treatment is delivered and how effective is that treatment going to be, not only from initial engagement with clients, but how do we keep them sustained in different levels of care? And a really big one, how do we prevent relapse? A lot of individuals struggling with co-occurring disorders, they're great at relapse. And also, I just want to talk a little bit about spirituality, because again, I think programs, services that focus on how to help clients spiritually with what they've experienced tend to be more effective. Okay. And at the end, we'll have a few minutes of questions as well. So, but like I mentioned, starting off, many of you I know are familiar with the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study that started way back in 1985 in our country. And it was one of the largest studies done at that time, over 17,000 individuals, to examine health and social effects of childhood experiences through the lifespan. Okay, it was funded partially through the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And we found some very interesting things from this study over time, especially when it was reported the results, the first batch of results were reported in the mid-90s. Like I said, nearly 18,000 participants involved, took place in California, all right, so California residents. The average age was 57 years old, 80% were white, 10% black, 10% Asian. 74% had some college, almost half graduated college, right? And almost half were men, real close there, male or female. So you think about the population I just described, and you oftentimes think of trauma. Not necessarily, okay? But when you look at the results of the study, it was pretty fascinating. Now, what is an adverse childhood experience? So just for a second, think of the clients that you work with day in and day out, and how many of them have experienced one of these that I'm going to share with you guys. Recurrent physical abuse, that is an adverse childhood experience. Recurrent emotional abuse, sexual abuse or neglect. Growing up in a household where there's any of the following: domestic violence, an alcohol or drug abuser, so somebody in active addiction, someone chronically depressed, mentally ill, or suicidal, so oftentimes somebody that's untreated for a significant mood disorder. At least one biological parent that was lost due to the patient during childhood, regardless of cause. Okay, when you think about the number of individuals in Kentucky, kids, adults now that lost a parent or a parent to overdose. And just in the United States last year, we had over 109,000 fatalities of overdoses. So really significant. Then lastly, someone incarcerated, having somebody incarcerated. So you think about all those different experiences. And in the study, what they found was pretty interesting. So if you look at, what percentage had at least one about 26%. How many had 2? 16%. 3, about 10%. 4 or more, 12%. So we had over 22% in this snapshot that experienced 3 or 4 adverse childhood experiences. Okay, and again, you know, we can kind of span this out to here in Kentucky and what that might look like. Louisville, Lexington, would that be different than Appalachia? You know, I'm just kind of throwing things out there, but when you start to think about also too, different levels of care of treatment, right? So I currently work in outpatient treatment. So folks that are coming in perhaps for weekly outpatient counseling. Many have experienced at least 1, if not 2 adverse childhood experiences. But is that different than who presents to residential treatment? Yes. You know, as the treatment level gets more intense, we tend to see more people that have experienced adverse childhood experiences. And, you know, working with some folks that I supervise that work in long-term residential treatment for men and women, it's not uncommon. Some of them have 6, 7 adverse childhood experiences that they've had. Okay, 8, you know, significant number. But a big take home from the study was it's much more common than people realize. So many more people walking around have experienced 1, 2, 3, several adverse childhood experiences. 64%, up to 17, almost 18,000 that experience at least 1 or more. 1 in 5, like I said, 20%, 3 or more adverse childhood experiences. And you start to extrapolate that to other populations. You know, who presents to inpatient psychiatric treatment? I worked in an inpatient psychiatric hospital for 14 years. We had a child psychiatric unit. Okay, so you imagine 16 ages 5 to 12 kiddos that come into psychiatric treatment. What percentage you guys think experience significant trauma? It's over 90%. Okay, who shows up to an adolescent inpatient psychiatric unit? But I also worked in an adult inpatient recovery center. High level of trauma, a lot of individuals. And inevitably, when you start to do their psychosocial assessment, and you go back and talk about, you know, when was the onset of trauma, what's going to be real close to that onset? Substance use. You start to see the connection between when trauma occurs, somebody's trying to cope with an unbearable, really unbearable emotions and events that occurred in their life. And it's not, you know, typically you'll start to see here comes alcohol use, here comes marijuana use, Valium, Xanax, opiates, you know, significant substance use. I've spent my whole career really working with kiddos in juvenile justice, probation and parole, you know, kiddos that struggle with substance use, and a good percentage of them, they've witnessed domestic violence. They've experienced physical abuse. They've lost a parent to overdose. They've lost a parent to incarceration. They've experienced significant stressors in their life. And yeah, when they turn to marijuana or Xanax or opiate, it helps them cope with that. And it works, unfortunately. Victims of trauma are found across all systems of care, and trauma histories oftentimes go undetected. When you think about, you know, who shows up to an emergency room, who shows up to a primary care office, complaining of their mood, you know, depression, anxiety, are they asked questions about trauma? Lots of times they're not, you know. We've just in the last probably 15, 20 years gotten a little bit better at that with some of our medical fields, but we still have a ways to go. And does it really get the attention that it deserves? I just did a training not too long ago on trauma-informed care and the importance of being trauma-informed if you're in this field. You know, do you know the proper way to interact with somebody that's experienced trauma? Because so many of the patients that we work with have. You know, the linkages between substance use disorder and trauma and trauma-related disorders, there's just a lot of evidence that shows that linkage. So whether you're working in inpatient treatment, outpatient, residential treatment, you know, really considering the connection of the clients that you're working with, their trauma history and their substance use history. There's an old expression, you know, best part about sobriety is to get your feelings back, and the worst part about sobriety is to get your feelings back. You know, so you think about the individuals that come into care, that now here they are with 7 days sobriety, 14 days, 18 days, 20 days, and here come the nightmares, here come the intrusive thoughts, I'm coming out of my skin, I can't sleep, I wake up with night terrors, and this is as good as it's gonna get. This is what sobriety is gonna, you know. So as a provider, are you treating that? As a program, are you effectively providing assistance for that? Do you have a co-occurring disorder group? Okay, do you provide services specifically helping clients make the connection between this is why I'm feeling this way? I'm not going crazy, I'm not this. No, you're a trauma survivor, and there's unique things about that. So that's an aspect that I think is really important. The linkage tends to be strongest between disorders of substance use and post-traumatic stress disorder. So we think about those individuals, especially that have experienced multiple adverse childhood experiences, that oftentimes when we do a clinical assessment, will meet the criteria for post-traumatic stress disorder. What type of treatment are they getting for that? You know, now I'll be the first to say, and I've done residential treatment. I love residential treatment. A good percentage of individuals with long-term sobriety and recovery and taking good care of themselves, you know, things will clear. They'll learn a lot of coping strategies. They'll get better at managing their emotions. And when you think about emotion regulation, distress tolerance, that's really significant. But we can always do better with how do we help them gain insight into what they're struggling with? How do we help them gain insight into what's going on from a brain functioning standpoint? That this is actually pretty normal for what they've experienced. Claudia Black, a lot of you folks are familiar with Claudia Black. She said in her training I attended hers, if we're chronically dysregulated long enough, we tend to become stuck in a dysregulated state, regardless of the original pain is still present or not. Okay? You're going to hear me in the next 5 or 10 minutes talk about dysregulated state. That's a lot of our clients. You know, when they present to care what they've experienced with their adverse childhood experiences and their trauma, they're very dysregulated. But can you see that? You know, lots of times you don't necessarily see that with the individual. So I'm looking at a room full of people here, and this is most everybody here. Now, the thing is, I can't tell. You turn to the person next to you. Have they experienced several adverse childhood experiences? Do they have PTSD? Are they in treatment? We don't necessarily know that. But right now, it seems like a pretty calm room. You guys are all looking at me. Everybody's smiling, kind of laid back. This is you guys. Yeah, there's an ebb and flow and lunch. I wish I got some Mountain Dew. What about, you know, that's a pretty, okay. But this is not a lot of our clients. When you think about a lot of our clients, okay, this is 9 a.m. at the goals group. This is at the 11 a.m. process group. This is when I just got off the phone with my PO, and I just found out, you know, somebody's trying to get custody of my kids. This is, you know, significant dysregulation that oftentimes occur. You look up at the top there, sympathetic hypoarousal, that's fight or flight. You know, the fact that a lot of our clients every day, their fight or flight is on, and it had to be on, you know. I'll never forget when I was working with adolescents, I had a 16-year-old adolescent female that came into our adolescent recovery center. And she was adulterated at a pretty young age because both of her parents were alcoholic and addicted. So she basically raised her 12-year-old sister and her 10-year-old sister, okay? And she talked to me about how within about 2 or 3 minutes when her father walked in the house, she had to immediately decide, do I need to hide with my siblings or do we need to actually leave the house? How bad is it gonna be? Okay, so her fight or flight was on continuously in the house, you know, and it worked. I mean, she kept her siblings safe, and fortunately, she took the brunt of some of that, you know. But you know, as far as fight or flight, it was survival, and a lot of the clients that you're working with, this was a big part of how they survived. It also plays a big role in that doesn't feel good, so what's going to make that go away? A substance. Amphetamine will do that. Opiates will do that. Marijuana will do that. Then you get the parasympathetic hypoarousal, depression, anxiety, anhedonia, you know. A lot of clients in early recovery, you know, things that we think will lift their spirits does not lift their spirits. You know, that's a milder kind of depressive state that things just aren't clicking the way they should be. You know, so I put this up here because when you think about what's the optimal arousal zone and basically what's the goal we're trying to get to with our clients in recovery, That's it. It's just their brain is working in a way that has a lot to do with the trauma that they've experienced. Okay, does that make sense? So, how we treat that and what type of services are provided for clients is really significant. That gets into just day to day, session to session. When you're working with an individual, are you checking in with them about how's your mood? How do you feel? Okay, how are you sleeping? Thinking about this, especially for the clients you know that have PTSD, that have experienced significant adverse childhood experiences, because this is more likely going to be them. The more severely we are dysregulated and or the longer it lasts, the greater the chance we subjectively experience unbearable discomfort or difficulty staying within our own skin, right? And that's why, especially in early recovery, let's take a step back, okay? When you look at what's the relapse rate for first-time heroin, fentanyl treatment, what do you guys think? How high is it? 50%, 80, 90, 100? Anybody want to take a guess? First-time treatment. I got a 95. Anybody else?
89.
89. One more. In the United States, it's 94%. Okay, so 94% will relapse. And that kind of gets into combination of things. This, right? But also, too, the power of the drugs that we're talking about, the level of care, and first-time treatment, first-time treatment exposure. Many people will begin self-medicating in order to move away from pain and move towards pleasure, which makes sense. So what helps? This is recovery solutions, right? So what helps? Things that we can encourage our clients to get into that have to do with mindfulness, things that have to do with how do we calm down the fight or flight, okay? How do we bring up, the anhedonia? And that gets into things that a lot of things they can do on their own, but treatment programs can go a long way with yoga and expressive arts, art therapy. We're sensory driven. So how do we pull that into the treatment that you're providing for your clients? If you're involved in inpatient treatment or residential treatment, the benefit of that, one of the reasons why I love it, is you have a little bit more of a captured audience. You have an ability to bring in lots of things that are not just an hour and a half sitting, listening to me. And the research shows, especially with methamphetamine addiction, it's not effective. It's just the brain can't endure that, okay? Especially when this is going on, music, drumming, chanting, meditation, guided imagery, anything like that you can bring in with your clients. I've got a few that, they've got guided imagery on their phones, apps for meditation. They can do it before they go into work. They can do it if they're stressed. They can do it out in the car. They can do it at home. But helping that fight or flight calm down, okay? Helping them get back to a normal arousal state is huge, and it plays a big role in preventing relapse. Other benefits, reduces rumination, the good times. I miss the good times, the rumination, okay? I worked in programs before where, back in the day, no war stories, okay? But really that's the brain doing its normal rumination about things that help me cope. I mean, it's oftentimes an early part of it. Definitely helps for stress reduction and boosting working memory. Focus is a huge one, especially for our clients in early recovery. A lot of them, struggle with the ability to remember, cognitively, taking things that are important from groups and individual sessions and from treatment. So these practices can really help with firing neurons, making connections, making them feel like I'm making progress, and here's a big one, feeling better. More cognitive flexibility, relationship satisfaction, and mind, body, and spirit, this is a big part of it. So anything like this that we can add and bring into treatment with our clients is really going to help with the trauma that they've experienced. Along with this too are some really strong emotions. A lot of clients I've worked with over the years, and this is probably the most toxic emotion that we have, shame. And unfortunately, with addiction, this is the emotion that tends to rise to the top. I heard Merrill Norton, talk about this, and you guys are familiar with Merrill Norton. Does the recovering person understand addiction as a disease state, or is addiction perceived as moral or character issue? Is this a moral or character issue? Unfortunately, a lot of our clients, that's how they view it. With choices that they've made and things that have happened as a result of their addiction, it's hard to look back and not have this emotion. Unfortunately, it's a very damaging emotion. It is neurologically toxic. In excess, neurobiologically a toxic emotion. So trying to assess with your clients, how are they with this? What is the level of shame? What's their running monologue that's in their head about this? It's always fascinating to me to ask clients about tell me the monologue that's in your head about this. Oftentimes it's shameful. And listen, this is not only self-induced, but it's what am I hearing from my family? What am I hearing from people in the community? What am I hearing from other individuals that are in my life? Unfortunately, this is a significant one. Neglect, rejection, shunning. The amygdala understands relationships to be unsafe. Now, this is a significant one. When this is going on, from a brain functioning standpoint, a lot of our clients are going to struggle with trust. Can I trust you? Can I trust you as a caregiver? Can I trust you as a therapist, as a peer support, as a case manager, as probation and parole, somebody in my life? Because of, it all goes back to adverse childhood experiences, trauma, and the fact that so many of our clients have experienced chronic trauma, which is repeated trauma, but also have experienced complex trauma, which is trauma done to me by a loved one. So here's a person I'm supposed to look to for love, trust, and understanding, and they're physically abusing me or sexually abusing me. Our brains are not programmed with how do you assimilate that? How do you handle that? And working with youth as long as I have, I've worked with enough to hear them talk about things that they've been told growing up. You're the reason I drink. I wish you were never born. This hadn't happened. I want to be depressed. Things that they absolutely have no control over. But does that lead to shame? Absolutely. And that carries on into adult life, and unfortunately will play a role in their addiction. So we can do some good work trying to understand with our clients what's the role this plays, because it is absolutely neurologically toxic. It's the most damaging emotion that we can experience. Shaming interactions in conjunction with a lack of relational repair and use of humiliation, such a state is proposed to be toxic to the developing brain. And so many of our clients, well, I'll ask you guys, thinking about the clients that you work with, what's their average age of onset of their drug and alcohol use? 10?
Teens.
Teens? Anybody else? What do you think? A lot of mine is 14, 15, and you start to kind of get into arrested development that comes from that. Here I am at 36, but I started using it at 12. So I've been on the planet longer using than not using. And what's the impact of this along with it? So that's really significant. And along with shame comes some other strong aspects of it: judgment, silence, secrecy. Secrecy is a big one. You think about adverse childhood experiences and the impact that has on the individual. It's really significant. The connection to other people, though, is a major coping strategy in treatment for this. And when you think about the benefit of recovery groups, it's so significant. Where do our clients get to practice trust again? Now it starts a lot with the people in the room, with me, as a caring professional, but it also gets into who can relate to me. So when I walk into an A meeting, when I walk into a double trouble group, when I walk into an NA meeting, that connection to other people really helps with this emotion. I had a client, an alcoholic, saw him for the first time a couple weeks ago, and his experience of the first few times walking into an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting and just listening and recognizing, okay, I'm not by myself here. There's other people that can relate to me. There's other people that understand how I tick, and almost like a huge sigh of relief, which I know goes a long way towards the shame of these experiences. So again, when we think about recovery solutions, and what we can do on a micro level, day to day with our clients, any focus on this is going to be beneficial for sure. Some of you are familiar with William White, wrote the book Slaying the Dragon, the History of Addiction Treatment in the United States. It's a great resource, a lot of great information. William White touched on the importance of recovery capital and how do we do in helping our clients become richer in their recovery. So when you think about financial capital, how do we become more wealthy with that? How do we do that with recovery? How do we enhance our clients' recovery capital? And listen, this goes a long way towards combating shame. This goes a long way towards, overcoming things like trauma and moving forward in recovery. So, and this is not an all-encompassing list, but tapping into, have our clients, and many of them had success in some way prior to their addiction. Okay, listen, this goes back to elementary school, high school, a GED, projects you completed, things you learned, things you mastered, music, playing an instrument. I mean, all kinds of different things that can be pulled in to help them in their recovery. Vision for the future. Show of hands, have any of you all ever worked with a client that you felt like that they just really had this feeling that they don't deserve to be in recovery? A lot of hands are going up. That's shame. I don't deserve to get well. I don't deserve to get better and maybe get my kids back or move forward in my recovery. So, if I can add to and influence their vision of the future, that's a big deal. Let's go from the glass is half empty to the glass maybe is much more full. Education is a significant piece of recovery capital. Can I help an individual get their GED? Can I help them with vocational training? Can I help them learn some type of skill? Anything like that. Huge piece of recovery capital. The research just shows, education and employability, if I'm working, if you're assisting me with getting a job, where I have to be on time, I get to interact with people, somebody can tell me I'm doing a good job, I'm going to get paid for it. That has a huge part to do with recovery capital and shame, and overcoming some of this. So programs that try to hook clients up with employment, while they're in treatment, encouraging that, continuing that, the research shows it's much more effective. Any resource, okay, whether that is transportation, this kind of gets into different forms of wealth, okay, quote unquote, transportation, Medicaid, insurance, any type of financial support of some kind, food stamps, any resource that we can encourage clients to get involved in or help them get linked up with is a big part of recovery capital. Communication skills, helping clients navigate things like job interviews, interacting with folks they might work with, and practicing some of that. Family support is recovery capital. The flip, it's kind of interesting. Family support can definitely be a protective factor. Can family be a negative factor? Absolutely. Okay, so one of the last supervision sessions I was doing with a CSW, that's what we were talking about. She's torn between, I want to go back and see my mom and sister, but they're actively using cocaine and meth. Okay, and they are pulling me back. So I'm looking at them as definitely not support at this point. Her family, quote unquote, the program where she is, the people in AA and NA, peer supports, other people trying to help her, are kind of becoming her family. Community support is a huge one. How am I accepted in the community? Are folks grateful to see me here? What's that experience like? Involvement in pro-social community groups, we've talked a bit about that. Religion and spirituality can definitely be a piece of recovery capital for clients and a protective factor. Depending upon what they've experienced in their life, it can also be a part of their trauma. So that's where, from an assessment standpoint, we really have to, dive into that to see how is our client going to feel about that. Returning to culture can be really significant part of recovery capital for our clients. Okay, we're going to interact with folks that because of their addiction, because of their trauma, they've moved away from their culture or from their ethnicity and principles of it. Helping them get back to it can be a huge piece of recovery capital for them. So one of the things I'm always considering is how can I add? How can I make my client wealthy? How can I add to their recovery capital? What's the next step? What's the next thing? A sponsor is recovery capital, a nurse practitioner. It may be an antidepressant is recovery capital. It's really going to be different for different clients. But this is I think of utmost importance when we're working with clients. And thinking about adverse childhood experiences, trauma, and substance use, we're talking about co-occurring disorders. So and this is from Kenneth Minkoff. When substance disorder and psychiatric disorders coexist, each disorder should be considered primary and integrated dual primary treatment is recommended, where each disorder receives appropriately intensive diagnosis-specific treatment. Okay. Now, here's the thing with that. Every year in our country, SAMHSA does a huge survey, right? Some of you probably filled out the SAMHSA survey. I used to fill them out all the time, okay? Why do they do that? They really want to know of the 20-something thousand programs out there that get any type of Medicaid, Medicare, insurance funding, what type of services do you provide? And here's the thing, specifically, do you provide any type of co-occurring treatment, a group, a session, a meeting, okay? One of the last surveys done in the United States showed about half of our programs do that, which means one half do not provide a defined co-occurring where we can help somebody. And we're going to talk about in the group your depression, your anxiety, your psychotropic medication, how are you doing, what's your sleep like, how does this interact with your substance use, how does it play a role in craving, how does it play a role in relapse and impact? You see what I mean? That's a hugely important aspect of recovery. When you think about recovery solutions, if we're emphasizing that and we're helping clients with that, we're going to do a better job. They're going to benefit from it. Now, not to say, a lot of programs, there's a doctor on staff, there's a psychiatrist or a nurse practitioner. They are treating psychotropic medication, there's group activities, there's other things that are addressing those needs, which is really significant, okay? And I think, our field, we've come a long way with that. It's just, I think we still have a ways to go with how effective we're going to be. So clients that can participate in one program that provides treatment for both disorders, right? When I came in the field in 1994, at that point, it was still parallel treatment. I'd go over to this clinic to talk to my CADC. I'd go over to this clinic to talk to my depression. I'd go over to this clinic to see the psychiatrist, and heaven forbid any of them talk to each other, okay? And that still happens. Now, here's the thing. If they talk to each other, it can be very effective. Right? We're seeing more and more integrated treatment where, I supervise a gentleman right now. He's in an integrated medical behavioral health clinic. I can go there, get my flu shot, treat any type of medical thing while I get my Vivitrol shot and talk to my therapist for my depression and my opiate addiction. That's an integrated place, okay? And they can talk to him for both their mental health and substance use. That's like the epitome of integrated care. And we're doing a better job of moving toward that, but we still have a ways to go. Mental and substance use disorders are treated by the same clinicians. So do I have a cross-trained clinician? Do I have a cross-trained provider that can provide a group in your setting that talks about co-occurring disorders, right? And listen, being able to do that 2-3 times a week, that's a huge deal, Double trouble groups, through NAMI, we're seeing more and more double trouble support groups where I can go in and the expectation is I talk about my bipolar disorder and my risperidone while I talk about my opioid use disorder. That's what should happen, okay? And you can't walk into an A meeting and necessarily do that. You see what I mean? So we need more double trouble groups. And if you want to add that, talk to your local NAMI organization. They can typically help with that. Clinicians are trained on psychopathology, assessment, and treatment strategies for both mental health and substance use disorders. Supervision I did yesterday, this supervisee has a patient in residential treatment diagnosed with schizophrenia, and we're thinking potentially a dissociative identity disorder and a major methamphetamine use disorder. That is significant co-occurring disorders. And to her credit, we're going to dive into dissociative identity disorder. How can we help this individual? How can we work with him in probation and parole? He's got a great probation officer that really wants to try to help him and figure some things out while we add to his recovery capital. There's a really good chance he will not be able to maintain on his own. He might need to be in a personal care home, a supportive, or sober living where there's a lot of support. But that's a good example of some of our clients that have more significant co-occurring disorders. How do we try to help them? Offer substance use treatment tailored for clients who have severe mental disorders, like I was just sharing with you guys. Emphasis placed on trust, understanding, and learning, okay? This supervisee did a good job of helping a peer support who came in and kind of witnessed him really struggling, right, of education. This is what's going on. This is schizophrenia, where it's not being treated, we're just trying to get the medication where it needs to and get them stabilized. That goes a long way. How do I interact with this client? Because I've got 16 clients right there, they're going to be a little different. They have to be a little different as far as how I interact with them. Slow pace, long-term perspective, what's early recovery the first year? So the client that comes in today into your treatment program on Wednesday, March 9th, 2024, they're still in early recovery. Do they understand that? Especially when you think about co-occurring and trauma, all the pieces of the puzzle. Stage-wise motivational counseling, very effective. Supportive clinicians, readily available, 12-step groups that are available to those who choose to participate and can benefit. Neuroleptics and other pharmacotherapies indicated according to their psychiatric state. Again, a lot of programs, provide this type of service. But for the treatment, the peer supports, the case managers, the therapists, those that are involved day to day, the more understanding I have about adverse childhood experiences, trauma, co-occurring disorders, I'm going to interact more effectively. And we're going to do a better job with our clients holistically. So why the benefit? When you think about individuals with co-occurring disorders, what leads to relapse? Okay, what leads to relapse where there's psychiatric symptoms? It's not a full-blown relapse. It's not regular use. Literally, sometimes it is, I smoked a joint. I had a client not too long ago. He was prescribed Risperdal, Wellbutrin, fairly stabilized. Hadn't seen him for a couple weeks, comes in, and he is not the same person. I can tell as soon as he sits down, rapid speech, lack of attentiveness, everything else. Bob, how you doing with your medicine? Well, Jeff, I smoked a joint. It's pretty good. And I had to delegate after that, and I didn't need that. And next thing you know, I'm in Florida. Just because on Friday I smoked a joint, and then I felt like, what? Do I need my medicine? I can control this. It'll be okay. So oftentimes it's not a full blown. It's the individual, and you guys know, it'll be different this time. I'll manage it. I won't go back to this. I'll just start with alcohol. I'll just take some Delta 8 or do this or that. And here it comes. Conversely, when you start to think about what leads to drug and alcohol relapse, we oftentimes think about old people, places, and things. But why do people lean toward going back to the old people and places and things? How do I feel? How do I feel? When I go back to the old place, I'm going to feel different, right? When I go back to the old thing, I'm going to feel different. So oftentimes it is my mood, stress, how am I managing this, that leads to relapse on drugs and alcohol. So us emphasizing to our clients the importance of your mood, how you're taking care of it, your overall recovery, attendance to 12-step groups, Vivitrol, medication-assisted treatment. It's such a big part of the puzzle for especially clients that have co-occurring disorders. So some principles here, employee recovery perspective. I just shared with you guys, what's early recovery the first year. So, helping our clients understand, what does that year look like? How do we get to stabilization with your bipolar disorder, your post-traumatic stress disorder, and your substance use disorder? How do we do those three things together here? That's going to take a while, Understanding it's a long-term process. So we want to have a treatment plan that takes that into account as well. I had a client coming out too long ago, and he's got 6 months recovery. And, so, man, what's that feel like? And we talked about that. And then, kind of not intentionally, but, I brought up the point of, listen, you're making incredible progress. the next 6 months to get to that final point, so to speak, of, hey, this is early recovery. And he took a sigh and it was like, okay, I know I have to keep my eye on things. I have to, if anything, take a step forward and keep adding to my recovery capital and not get lackadaisical, not take a step back and think I've got this. Adopt a multi-problem viewpoint. So, looking at all the different things. This is also about recovery capital. Housing, how can I help with that? Helping with insurance, getting on Medicaid, other types of support there. Work, supportive network, treatment. So this is an aspect that's really helpful for us. Not only rehabilitation, that is there, but again, rehabilitation implies I had a skill set, I got away from it for my drug and alcohol use, and now I'm trying to get back to it, okay? Many of our clients, if I picked up at 14, 15, 16, I never had it, okay? So here I am in front of you in your inpatient program at 32 years old, but I've been using for 18 years. This is habilitation. I'm learning this for the first time, so I can't assume that people have the coping strategies and the emotion regulation skills and the structure. We've got to help provide that for them in treatment. Phased approach, so engagement. When they first walk in, how do I build up a therapeutic alliance with them? How do I help them get stabilized? Clients with post-traumatic stress disorder, especially in early sobriety. I'm coming out of my skin, I can't sleep, I don't have an appetite. My mood is depressed. I'm severely anxious. The last thing I want is to be around a whole bunch of people that I don't even know, not in my own place. And we're like, hey, life's great, right? No, I'm ready to get high and get out of here. And they sign out against medical advice. Take me back to jail. I've heard that a bunch of times, which is unfortunate. So understanding stabilization, treatment, aftercare, ongoing care, big part of it. Address specific real life problems early in treatment. So, again, psychosocial rehabilitation. I'm leaving. Where are you going? I don't know. That's not good. Where are you going to land? Okay, how am I helping this person with sober living? Right? Anything I can do to decrease the potential for relapse. Good sober living. I'm really hopeful, this is a whole other talk, but in the next year or two in Kentucky, we start to regulate sober living. Sober living needs to be regulated, okay? There's some great programs out there, and there's some that are preying on a vulnerable population. So I'm just gonna throw that out there, and I'm hopeful that, that's gonna change in the future. There's great guidelines out there. There's national guidelines out there for what sober living should provide and how should it be provided and who should do that and how it should be regulated, just like when OIG used to walk into my places. So hopefully it'll move in that direction here in Kentucky. Plan for the client's cognitive and functional impairments. With co-occurring disorders, kind of like how I've described, we have to understand that, an individual that's been using methamphetamine for 6 years is going to have some significant cognitive impairments. In fact, when you look at some of the research that's being done in early recovery, a lot of what that person's going to experience is similar to schizophrenia with their psychosis, auditory, visual hallucinations, okay? So, it makes sense that we should probably consider how do we deliver treatment? How do we deliver treatment? Methamphetamine use disorder, more and more of what we're seeing is shorter 30-minute, 15 minutes of an in-person activity, hands-on, followed by 15 minutes of processing it is going to go much further for the client than sitting, talking to me for an hour and a half, dozing off, and not be able to remember anything I shared with them. But we still do that. Heck, we'll do it for 3 hours, 4. And yes, they will sit through it, but it's not going to be very effective. Gradual pacing, visual aids, hand things to clients, let them walk out with things. I'd like to see a client leave a program with a huge folder full of all kinds of stuff that they've worked on, done, completed, because they're much more likely to assimilate that and have an understanding of it, right? Listen, you guys are hanging in here with me, doing a good job, but I know confidently if I come find you tomorrow, you might get 15% of this. That's just the nature of who we are, okay? Now think about your clients and what that's going to be like for them. It just makes sense it's going to be difficult. Use support systems to maintain and extend treatment effectiveness. And these are things we do every day, but it goes a long way. So whether it is, self-help groups, family, faith, community, a lot of individuals with co-occurring disorders will burn bridges. They'll burn bridges with programs. Oh, they're on the do not admit list. They will burn bridges with their family. I don't want to see them again. They will burn bridges with employers. So by the time we get into recovery, they oftentimes will need some assistance with how do we overcome that. And we will play a huge role in providing them with that assistance, because lots of times we know what's around. We know the resources, we know what's available. I can't expect my client to know that. So last thing I want to talk about here before we take a break, the things I've shared with you and the impact on our clients and what that does to somebody spiritually. Okay, what that does to somebody spiritually. We're spiritual creatures, no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The things that we do day to day to take care of ourselves, to lift our spirits. What do you do to lift your spirits? At the same time, it's kind of interesting that alcohol is called a spirit, because you think about what it does to us and the impact that it has and how significantly negative it is. Whatever I can do to help my client with improving their spirituality. Now, listen, for some people, that will be faith, God, religion, which is great. And if in our program in some way we can support that and encourage that, but that's not going to be for every client. For other clients, you may not know it, but they've been traumatized by that. That's a part of what they've been through, okay? But that doesn't mean that there aren't other things we can do to help them spiritually, right? And a lot of that starts with just how we engage with clients. Are we genuine? Are we respectful? Is it trusting? We can be, firm, but it's done in a way that's going to be supportive and helpful with the client. But all the things that we're trying to do to increase recovery capital, help them with their co-occurring disorders, that goes a long way to how that helps spiritually with the person. Connection is huge. I had a client the other day, trying to remember the situation. Yeah, it was really interesting, involved in the legal system. And all of a sudden he saw a connection between, here's a representative of the legal system and myself, both in recovery. And what's that like? And the positive impact that that's now having on him, okay? And, we sat there and looked at each other. I'm like, you know what? You keep doing the right thing happens. All right, spiritually, there's some really great things that will oftentimes occur with that. So I'll leave you guys with this. Are you filled with the spirit of transformation? If you're not, why work with this population? Patients respond to people who care. They have great instinct. You must be part of the change you wish to see with your patients. Your patients need a message of hope, not through books and packets. They need a message from you. That's from Father Leo Booth. Some of you guys are familiar with. So we got a few minutes for questions. If anybody has any questions, be more than happy. Yes, sir, please.
You were talking about the 15 minutes of hands-on and 15 minutes of kind of talk therapy.
Yep.
What are some good examples of those 15-minute hands-on exercises?
You know what? We're going to do a brief intervention about relapse prevention. So I'm going to hand out some index cards. I want you to put a line through the middle. Who are the people in your support network? Who are the people that if I hear you're with them, you've already relapsed? And let's fill that out and let's process that, talk about that, and boy, they can take that with them. Okay? Anything where I get them up. I used to love in my groups. I have a huge dry erase board. Come on up. And man, I want them filling stuff out. I want them participating. I want that they will be much more engaged. Okay, but anything like that that's hands-on, and a lot of the research is showing that client, especially with methamphetamine, as far as what that's going to be more effective. And you can put that in an IOP group. You can put that in a partial program. But if, it's more the typical sit, listen, hour and a half, good luck, you might get compliance, but that's a good question. Other questions you guys have? Anybody?
How do you feel about
Oh, go ahead.
Are you guys within this presentation?
Yeah, you guys want? I'm fine if you guys want.
Sure.
I think, yeah, there's my email address. shoot me an email, be more than happy to send it to you.
We'll put it on the website as well.
Yeah. Yeah, please.
How do you feel about role play with a trigger box?
A trigger box, tell me about that.
You open up a
Oh.
shoe box and it's filled with stuff that looks exactly like their favorite things.
Yeah, here's the thing with that. You know, you're kind of getting into like systematic desensitization. You know, I will say that one, well, I tell you, you know, not knowing 100% how all the different clients might react to that, okay, and where they are. And then most especially, what is the debriefing like with that? Because the last thing you want to do is really trigger a client. Are you okay? Yeah. And they walk out and we can't find them. You know, now we'll say this though, there can be some things where they may watch something, okay? Watch something because, you know, whether it's a movie, something, you know, a TED Talk, something like that, and we can pull that in and process it. What I think would be more helpful sometimes is role playing like drug refusal skills. You know, let's practice what it's like to look at somebody you used to use with and say, no, don't ask me now, don't ask me ever again. And what's that feel like? I used to love to do that with clients, and they really get into it, you know. That one though, I think you know, there's a little bit more of a risk of triggering somebody to the point that they're really going to struggle, you know. It's hard to predict who would take it away. It's a good question.
Kind of about the delivery.
Yeah.
And follow up.
Well, and listen, the follow-up, especially.
Most important.
Oh, yeah, because, you know, you know, residential care, okay, inpatient maybe, you know, but I mean, you think about doing something where, see you tomorrow, that could be really hard. You know, I mean, literally, I'm in my car driving away and they don't make it home, you know. Yeah, please.
Yeah, we used to do something similar to that in a 6-month residential,
Mm-hmm.
you know, around month 4, kind of getting ready to
Yep.
discharge, but started with photos and then videos.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
The therapist.
Slow.
Yeah, therapist was really good about if it was alcohol or some type of scent, recreating that with essential oils, it was
Mhm.
amazing.
Yep.
And then we have the ability to take them to a local gas station so that they can walk by the things at the counter, walk
Yep.
by the coolers, you know, in a
Slow
very
process.
slow, yeah, week after week type of thing.
I had a colleague that, and she was certified music therapist, and she would ask clients, you know, tell me the song. You know, every client's got a song, you know, that man, when that thing plays. And in a group where you play it and you process it and what it's like in a safe environment, you know, and the impact that has on the brain and what it brings up. Let's get up and write some stuff. See, that can be very effective. You know, versus we never talk about it, it never comes up, and the first time they leave the facility, that song pops on. Whew, look out. You know. Other questions? These are good questions. Anybody has? All right. Well, thanks, guys. I appreciate y'all hanging in there.
And I've been working on the planning and organization of the That's why you receive at least one email from me. And that's how I got the chance to meet Dr. last year. And today, I have the chance to introduce and interview Dr. Even if I'm sure that you are all meeting and without knowing any introduction, I will briefly point out some of the things that he has done, because otherwise, 1 hour will not be enough to shortly, he is a college champion, a best-selling author, a teacher, and a mentor. When I talk about the college champion, I included this man because Dr. Mooney contributed to the establishment of recovery programs across the world. He has done that in the US, Canada, United Kingdom, Bosnia, Egypt, Ghana, and I also added Romania because he has done that, and in Mexico. Now, when we are not sure that we have all the information we need, we usually Google. And we live in the technology era, and now we have also ChatGPT. I did ask the artificial intelligence, in what countries Dr. Mooney contributed to the establishment of recovery programs. And I found out that he did trainings about recovery also in China, in South Africa, and Japan. So all over the world. In addition to his medical career. The best-selling author, I'm sure that you are familiar with the recovery book and My Life in Recovery. We'll talk about them during the interview. And he is also a teacher and mentor. He has a career as a professor. He still teaches people and is constantly looking to find mentees and people who are interested in recovery to continue his work. This image is from a Zoom meeting from last year with the Recovery Africa groups that Dr. Mooney established. And he was explaining it in that group. I will ask him details about this and many more during the next few minutes. And there were more participants. I just used our places in order to protect their privacy. So he is conducting workshops. You can see him here. He has a busy day. He has a meeting this evening, for instance, until 9 o'clock. And thank you for joining us this year too. We're going to talk about the journey from suffering to serenity. I like this title when I saw it the first time in your slides. So you see recovery as a pathway from suffering to serenity. Could you tell us more about this, please?
Let's see, we'll be here till like 8 o'clock, because once you turn me on, I don't turn it off very easily. First of all, let me say what a pleasure it is to be here. I feel qualified in a number of different ways. I'm Al Looney. I am a medical doctor, and I'm glad that I have an opportunity to represent the science and medical side of addiction and particularly recovery. Because Whitney and I talked about how to do this session last year, and you saw a couple of my PowerPoints. Last year, I did a lot of work on PowerPoints. Can you all hear me in the back? It's kind of an echo, but I just want to make sure you can understand it. Wave or tell me to slow down. But it's not the PowerPoints I've learned after doing them for 30 years is not really the best way to retain information. And if I do my PowerPoint like I normally do, by tomorrow, it's all gone because the data, the numbers, the things that are important, and the things we decide what's going on in a disease like addiction, the numbers just don't, the stats just don't stick very well, even though it's important to have the numbers and the stats to understand the illness. But there's a model, like Cosmina said, and I come out of a medical background, and there's kind of a model that is, I'll go ahead and say just in case, it does, I'm sure they can go fine today, but I'm a little apprehensive when I do something new. The new brain science says that it's not good to stay in your comfort zone, and it really is healthy to get out of your comfort zone. And I've learned that from my recovering alcoholic addict patients. And you get to a point you got to practice what you preach. And so when I hear about things and I understand things about recovery, I find myself pushing a little bit on those boundaries, so I can find ways to be more effective. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. The model that we're using today in teaching is not that PowerPoint flip up a slide and show people the stats model, but there's a history that I have in my medical training of surgery. I will spend all day telling you about all of my experience and background with Kentucky, because I live in Raleigh, North Carolina, grew up in Georgia, But talking about higher powers, when I applied for an internship in surgery, I was going to be a surgeon, and those internship training programs are matched by a computer. I have no clue other than putting in a list of applications who I'm going to work for. And the computer decided that I was going to be a surgeon trained in Louisville, Kentucky. And so that's where I spent about 4 years of my life. 1 year as a surgery intern, first year resident at the old, and I bet you nobody here except Jim probably remembers the old, not university, but Louisville General Hospital. And if we had a full medical audience, I'd probably go into a little bit of details because I don't make hospitals like that anymore with 30-bed wards, and that's where I trained as an intern. But I had a couple of experiences at Louisville. First as an intern at Louisville General, walking, anybody from Louisville in here? Well, across from the hospital, and the old Louisville General in the 70s, they built with federal money, JDAC. And I remember walking from one 30-bed ward to another 30-bed ward down a long hall. It was nothing but plate glass windows, big windows, old-fashioned windows, but they were all glass. Looking at that really modern building and wondering, what do they do there? I mean, here we got the jalopy to live in surgery, and that's the modern medical building over there. What are they? And of course, they treat drunks. That was what that building was built for during a time where the funding from a hero in the addiction field, Harold Hughes, who was the senator from Iowa, who was a truck driver that got into AA and recovery and went to the Senate and changed everything and started recovery. We all have a debt of gratitude to Senator Hughes. He was governor first. And day after day after day, if you're in a surgery residency, it gets to be a monotonous drone of a year of that, looking across at JDAC, and it became a kind of a spiritual message to me that I was in the wrong building as a surgeon. And that message was hammered in a way that still resonates today with me. Dr. Moss knew my professor, Hiram Polk. If anybody's been around Louisville a long time and you know Hiram Polk, he was an interesting guy, and he never understood why I left surgery. But Dr. Polk changed my life, because one day, and I never will forget it, we were, and now I'm like 50 years further down the road, and I've got some data to back up my gut that was not really understood by the faculty at University of Louisville at that time. But we were having kind of an argument before attending rounds. On Saturday mornings, this is not one of the short answers I was thinking I was going to. I promised her short answers, but it gets back to going from suffering to serenity. Yeah. So I do remember the question, but this is a big, important story in my life, and all I am now is a frustrated old man with a lot of stories. They had what we named, it's probably been that way for generations, the Louisville Knife and Gun Club. And as an intern, I was in charge of emptying the ambulances. And gosh, I'm not looking at any faces that are going to have a clue what we're talking about here. But in those days, in the mid-70s, police, there was no such thing as EMS. Every police car in the city of Louisville was a station wagon with a gurney in the back. And anything that happened, a car wreck, a shooting, a stabbing, the police would put the person on the gurney in the back of their station wagon and dump them at the back door of Louisville General Hospital. And I was the intern that year that manned the gurney at the door. And everybody seemed to puke up beer and pizza. And we would work all night long saving lives. And one Saturday morning, when all the attendings get together, the wisest doctors and surgeons are always the wisest doctors. So these were the wisest doctors in all of Kentucky at the University of Louisville, would conference about what we were doing as interns and residents to help people. And we were frustrated this morning. We said, we bring these people in, we save their life, we patch up the stab wounds, we open them up and fix the gunshots. They're bleeding from varices, from cirrhosis, and we stop that. And then we send them back to the street to live a happy life. And guess what? They all come back in 2 weeks with one of the same things. And then eventually they died and we never see them anymore. And there was some frustration on the part of the medical people. What is going on here? What purpose are we serving doing what we're doing? And I come from a recovering family, and nobody ever asked the intern anything, but, and I never got asked, you know, maybe we have something we can do for these people. I knew there was a lot, but I didn't know how to communicate as being the low guy on the totem pole. But Dr. Polk, and we had all the senior faculty there and on Saturday morning rounds because they were the experts that told us what we needed to be doing. And Dr. Polk made a statement that changed my life. He said, guys, you need to be quiet. I want you to, if there's one thing you need to know if you're getting training in surgery, everybody on this on this earth has a purpose. And some people's purpose in life is to teach surgeons how to operate. And, you know, everybody went back to the wards and never heard another whimper from all the crazy work we were doing patching up alcoholics and addicts. And yet I'm thinking, wait a minute, what? There's something wrong with this picture. And to look at where Kentucky is now, and there was a second chapter to that Dr. Polk story because he couldn't understand why I went to spend my life devoted to helping alcoholics and addicts. And he said, Al, if you think you've done the right thing and you want to share it with us, come back and tell us how it's gone. Be a visiting professor here for a day. So when a friend of mine, some of y'all might know Burns Brady, asked me to come back and make a contribution to Louisville and kind of fold in the work of the Healing Place to what was going on in medical education in Louisville, he asked me what I might like. And I said, you know, I'd love it if you and Dr. Polk could invite me to be a visiting professor at the new University Hospital and talk about what I recognized and made a life decision about as an intern. And I did that, and a whole different place. They had an ICU, a surgery ICU, and I never will forget walking around at Dr. Polk's request. So there was no real addiction service or treatment in University Hospital at that time. We walked around and looked at the people in the ICU, and essentially, I think there were like 12 beds. Somebody may remember better than I how many beds they had, but like 8 of them were alcoholics and addicts in the ICU, and we talked about those people. I don't think it had ever been mentioned in the University Hospital ICU before. And on the spot, you know how surgeons are, Dr. Polk said, we're going to start having these people seen by people who can help guide them to recovery. And the Healing Place was pretty new at that time, and they started arranging through a faculty member on in the Department of Family Medicine, started arranging 12-step calls from the homeless people at the Healing Place a few blocks away in Louisville. And one of that faculty member actually did an investigation like you would study drugs when you give this group one drug, this group another, this group a placebo. And it got to it was not a great publication, but it's out there in print somewhere. But Rick did a study where he said, let's take a random sample of these people and have the psychiatrist see them, and another group seen by social workers, and the third group seen by the homeless people from the Healing Place, and let's track the outcomes, see who does best. And guess who did best? The homeless intervention, like what I call kind of medical 12-step call, by far did best to help the people who were in the ICU from something alcohol and drug related. And I wish Rick moved on to another university and that did not continue that research. But it was, a lot of these things were very meaningful to me. And it's important to me too, because one of the things that's happening in this part of Kentucky now with Union College is a hypothesis, an idea, a thought is now, or at least they're talking with me, and I've seen some evidence of a collaboration with wise, experienced scientists. And I don't consider myself a wise, experienced scientist. I'm a clinician, so I'm pretty good at asking questions. But there's some people here who are beginning to formulate hypotheses that can be studied in an academic way that can give us the results we need. And one thing that takes us to, because there are other people around the country that are doing that, and we're also collaborating with people on the East Coast and the West Coast, and we were talking this morning about some people up in the Northeast, at Harvard who are beginning to look at some things that happens in recovery that aren't typically measured, but you guys are building systems of care in the community here that allow them to be measured and studied in a way that they can be broadcast out to the world and replicated. Some of that relates, and some of you may have heard, and I never miss a chance to talk about the Cochrane study, the Cochrane Lab. I spent my whole life, I graduated from school in '74, so you do the math, that's how long that is. It's longer. I mean, I'm an old man now, but I've always had to say 12-step recovery, in my experience, has been the most valuable way to help alcoholics for the long haul. Now, detox is important, there are other things that are important. But 3 years ago, March 2020, this group of people from funded by the Cochrane Library from Harvard and Stanford mostly, came up with a publication that says, and you got to understand how they measure treatment, because we know AA is not treatment, but there's nothing else that kind of fits the category that AA is in. So the scholars lump it in the category of treatment, like CBT or whatever else, even motivational interventions and things like that. But when evaluated in the best scholarly way possible, 12-step recovery is the best, quote, treatment that exists on the face of the earth. And it equals something, some of the other therapies like CBT, but it doesn't, but it's sustainable and it's free through 12-step recovery. So it's kind of cool. It's something that was in my gut and I've observed it in friends and family. Actually turns out to be evaluated in a scholarly way. And it's kind of like, you got to do it now. You know, if you have somebody with pneumonia and you don't consider penicillin as an option to treat pneumonia, you're probably not being a very effective clinician. And we know the same thing now about 12-step recovery. It's got to be in the choices. And I've spent a lot of my life talking about not just that fact, but talking about the data that contributed to that evidence, because it's pretty important. And that gets to the suffering thing, because the suffering, the serenity is part of recovery. You know, there's a lot we could do to give people substitutes and do things that don't solve the problem, because what's an alcoholic, always an alcoholic, we believe. But the suffering can be transitioned into a meaningful life. And that's kind of what all the science I talked about has kind of shown.
I want to say that thank you for telling us about how you found AGRS and why did you unify life to the recovery. And also the fact that you are easy to finding scientific research data that is for your theory that you presented in the recovery, which is organized in this way on the recovery zone. So I also have the response. So explain us how we could navigate from one to the other.
You know, what I just said about how effective 12-step recovery is, I was very frustrated as a physician because I watched people who knew about 12-step recovery relapsing and dying all the time. And I began to say, why can something be so effective and yet so hard to engage? And that's where at least the scientific thinking began to come in. I began to take it on, and it was about 15 years of my life, and I'm still into that now, but it's dispersed a little bit. I began to look at people who were successful and unsuccessful in recovery, and eventually I focused on the people who were successful in recovery. And back before focus groups were popular, we formed a focus group of what's known in the recovery community as winners. And if you're in recovery, you know who the winners are in your community. And I might not know them, and I might not even have a good definition, but we asked people in several communities in southern Georgia, who are the winners? And not surprisingly, the same names kept popping up. And so eventually, we got about 20, 25 names that kept popping up as winners. We said, okay, we want to invite these people to a focus group and see what's behind the curtain of being a winner. And it was interesting and frustrating all at the same time. First of all, everybody that came, most agreed, everybody had been sober longer than 10 years. That was kind of I know the brain heals over about 10 years. So it's a little So I was not interested in getting people involved in this depth of investigation without having 10 years of sobriety. It takes about that long to kind of get in that track that people recognize as winners. And then we're being asked, well, how did you get to this point? And of course, none of them agreed that they were winners. And I had to explain, no, you didn't decide you were a winner. You have humility and you're not going to be driven by ego. But your name kept popping up. The people that you live in the community with think of you as the winner. And so let's just move on with the questions. And we found that these people gave us a laundry list of everything going back to college, building new relationships, finding a new fishing hole. I mean, all kind of stuff that went into what they just determined was success in recovery. And I don't even drink, and it was like, I want to go out and get a drink after I heard all this stuff. It's just more than a person could possibly handle. But then we got a little wiser and said, okay, you didn't do all this in the first month, did you? And they said, oh, no. And they all knew internally what we were trying to research scientifically. They said, no, what we did is the first thing we had to do, we had a disease that was killing us. We had to not die. And not dying is not just having a good time, but then they describe it. You guys work with it. You know what not dying takes. You got to get sober. You got to get sponsored. You got to know the big books. You got to get often people need some kind of professional care. You've heard a lot about dual diagnosis, SMI, and things that people need help with if they're going to live sanely in society. And then they identified first that what we call now the red zone. Before anything else in recovery can happen, you got to be alive. And which is no insignificant task for an alcoholic who's spiraling down to death. And then they said, once we, and for those of you familiar with the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, we eventually found boundaries for what we call the red zone. You're in recovery, and it's a good question. If we had 30 more minutes, I would open up a discussion about when is a person in recovery. I've seen people who were drunk, and my opinion was they were in recovery. I've seen people who were sober for a year, and I think you are not in recovery, the white knuckle world. So, like so often I've learned to do is what Alcoholics Anonymous, which is a book of several hundred pages, full of observations. That was a bunch of lay people, hopeless lay people making observations that they had no way to know where it was going to go. But in the very first cycle of AA, I won't quiz you guys. People from online couldn't answer. But the membership requirement was an honest desire to stop drinking. And then after a period of time, AA removed the word honest. So I call it the only loophole in AA. You can lie about your willingness to get sober. And I've used that a number of times with lawyers and people that are below OCD and say, I'm hopeless. I don't want to stop drinking. And I said, well, good news. That's the only thing you can really lie about in AA. I've sent people back to their sponsor that consult about it. Nobody's ever come back telling me I was wrong. But in the early days, it was an honest desire, and they took the word honest out. So that actually became our boundary for recovery, an honest and sustained desire. Many alcoholics puke the next morning in the toilet and say, I'll never do that again, but it's not a sustained desire to stop.
Dr. Mooney?
Yes.
I had some short case presentation for you.
Okay.
And
Give me
one
just
is
one,
similar.
and then but that same conversation, we then found out that people say that like then they moved on to be all they feel. Live your dreams, be all you can be. And that's the yellow zone. But those two things are selfish. And the green zone, which we said is something that Bill Wilson moved into in his late recovery, he called emotional sobriety. But I packed a little medical information on top. And that's the green zone where we live as long as we can and we pass it on to others. And that really became the organization behind the publication of recovery.
So let me present you one example. A real person, of course, I changed the name. I'm sorry that I do this. Okay, so I'm John, a 56-year-old man, divorced, and I'm here. I have several health issues. My driver's license has been suspended several times due for DUI. I haven't drunk over the last 6 months, but I'm spiraling down. I'm stressed and beyond stressed. I do not sleep well. I cannot do anything during the day. I watch TV in order to clear my mind. What should I do in the morning?
First of all, if a person's been sober 6 months, the brain is beginning to clear and they can be receptive to the hard work of recovery. So that fact is important. But people can stay sick and be sober. You know, the old idea is to have a binary kind of perspective of sober or drunk. And if you're sober, you're fine. If you're drunk, you're not. And there's much more of a developmental perspective that has served me. So I would follow up a situation like that by asking questions. What are you doing for support now? Are you doing anything for support? And then what are you willing to do? And if it's possible, I can be a little strong-armed if I need to. But if I can recruit, and there's a whole field of study called motivational enhancement therapy, that if somebody's not ready, the science of motivation has shown that if we can identify where people are in readiness, we can actually intervene. There are 5 levels that came out of the old smoking literature. Pre-contemplation, you're not even thinking about it. Contemplation, you're thinking about it. Preparation, you're ready to do something but still sitting on go. Action and maintenance. And those 5 levels can be applied in anyone's life. And AA really is about levels 3, 4, and 5, preparation, action, and maintenance, and it fits perfectly. But there are strategies and courses and even degrees you can get on motivational enhancement that allow us to move someone from one level to the next. And the crisis idea that she talks about has been helpful to me because if I can identify a crisis, alleviating the crisis often prepares somebody for the work of treatment and rehab. Thanks.
And now we have only less than 10 minutes left. Let's try our challenge. We discussed that Dr. Mooney will answer 30 questions. So please brief.
I think I can do what she says it's impossible.
And I was just going to say, be as brief as you can without being invasive. And answer these questions. Let's see how.
Do you have a handbook like this? You should send them to Alabama, probably. Okay, let's see.
Okay. So we start. What book would you recommend to anyone interested in understanding addiction and recovery?
There are 3 books. The first one is the book Alcoholics Anonymous. It's the textbook for recovery, and now that it's being proven with science, it's even better than I thought. AA's book, 12 Steps and 12 Traditions, digs a little deeper and gets into more spiritual work that's helpful for lifelong recovery. And then I got to push my own book to recovery with. So that's what I would say.
According to you, what would be 3 of the most effective interventions in treating addictions?
First thing is detox. And detox is not just detox. Detox is detox and moving into the next effective level of treatment. Other has to do with relationships. Early is relationships with other people in recovery that we can look at like a mirror for ourselves. And then there's also kind of a practical side of recovery that means getting back into life. What can you do? You don't have to go to the gym, but how about a walk to a clubhouse somewhere? How about a walk with a friend talking about the meeting last night you went to together?
What would be one of the most dangerous substances someone uses?
Well, you know, the science says that nicotine is probably the most dangerous substance, but that is not understood well within our social structure. In Africa, where I've done a lot of work, they do that. And if you smoke a cigarette, you're back in detox. So we have a little bit more of what I call a harm reduction philosophy over here. But it's hard to quantify for me which drugs are the most dangerous, because some of the ones that I would think would be the most dangerous give such a dramatic effect that people hit bottom so quick that they can rebound pretty quickly too. So it depends on the person.
What are some of the most important factors that make people vulnerable to addictions?
Trauma has been mentioned, that's important. Probably the most important factor is genetics. You know, I come from a family where essentially everybody is an alcoholic. And it would be pretty stupid for me to be a drinker. There's nothing in society that alcohol offers that we need. Drinking alcohol, I'm not a prohibitionist. I'm not going to tell you not to drink, but I'm just citing evidence. And this was actually cited in Canada 2 months ago, and they took some heat for it. But there is no science that says alcohol is helpful. But there's a lot of science that says that it's one of the major killers in our society. So that abstinence approach and the danger of alcohol based on genetics is probably the #1 factor. If you have the genetics, a choice to not drink is probably the most important thing somebody can do in prevention.
Which is the recovery zone that encompasses the most dangerous risks?
The most dangerous what?
Risks.
Risk. It's different every place. You know, it's in the red zone, there's a little wiggle room to relapse and listen and get involved. But one of the things that scares me is in the green zone, when people have good solid recovery for 20 or 30 years and go get the hernia fixed, the doctor gives them some OxyContin for pain. As a matter of fact, after 3 days, those opiates don't work. After 3 days, opiates create more pain than they alleviate. And it's not well known, doctors are getting better. Unless you have cancer, that's a different story. But so often those people with long-term recovery can be the most at risk because the addiction is still kind of doing push-ups, waiting on a relapse. And if somebody waits 30 years and then relapses, it's like a cancer coming back. I think of it as a doctor, like a cancer after 10 years. Breast cancer comes back, and it's not going to be a good ending. Whereas early on, we can deal with relapse and risk, and the success is great.
You are doing well. We're at the question number 6. What was the most rewarding experience you had while working in recovery?
Well, I could come up with a list of them. Probably the most meaningful, though, and I wasn't working in recovery, but my dad had been in Lexington at the narco farm, which is a prison, if you don't know what the narco farm is. And I kept asking, where's Daddy? Where's Daddy? And nobody would be honest. They said he's off learning to be a better doctor because when he got out of prison, he was a better doctor. But when he came home the first night he was home, he said, I've been in prison. Nobody told me that. And it was, instead of being a blow to my emotions, it was a burden lifted off my shoulders because I knew for the first time as an 11-year-old kid that I was hearing the truth from a dad that I loved so much, but had been lied to for years and years in his active addiction.
What was the worst experience you had when you did recovery?
I can't think of many. I think there was one time I was mentioning it to Nancy. We were talking about whatever little box where you give people triggers. I did something a little similar to that one time. I'm a pilot. I love to fly, and I love to work with alcoholic pilots. The FAA has a path back to flying. That'll reuse up all my time if I tell you about the HIMSS program. But I took a bunch of these guys. I said, man, life in recovery is like being high on life. So I said, I'm a pilot, so let's go out and fly, and I'll show you how to get high on life. And everybody went flying. They loved it. We did all kinds of stuff in the airplane. And it was a big airplane, 9 people, I think, were in it. And we came back, and half those people got drunk the next week. And I'm thinking, what in the world? And what they described, the ones that stuck around for the post-mortem, said, you know, it was so great up there, feeling so good, getting high on life, that when we got back to that boring halfway house, we realized we just needed to go out and take a drink. Or at that time, it was mostly crack cocaine. And so living a life of moderation for the first few years of recovery never fails.
What would be the strongest motivator for someone in recovery?
I don't think I can do that. Well, first of all, I'm the poster child for keep coming back. This is my 62nd year as a member. If we have press here, don't say that I said I was a member of a 12-step group, but I joined Alateen, now Al-Anon, and that was 61 years ago. And yet I see a ton of people that come and say 1 to 12, 1 to 12, 1 to 12. I'm bored and they're out of here. and it doesn't end well when that happens. But one of the things that has allowed me to stick in recovery, I mean, I'm kind of a fanatic today. I'm loving what we're doing, and I'm not sure whether I'm going to win the game or not. But one of the things that I've always slapped people on the wrist for being intellectual, but I'm in a phase of my understanding of addiction now. If I can help you to search for the curiosity, the intellectual curiosity for what's around the next corner, what the mystery is around the next corner, and you might come back again, because that's what kept me coming back. I've got a whole different punch list to talk about this year than I had last year. And what the hell's happened in the past year except my sore leg and my eyes and the pandemic, you know? But it's exciting to me, okay?
What would be the strongest obstacle in the recovery process?
I think it's living in a society that kind of is full of stigma and has an economy of drugs that if you're not taking something, you can't have a good time, you can't, remember every emotion we have, depression, anxiety, fear, all these things are our friends. And one of the things I found in recovery that was not intuitive, and people didn't teach me much, but I figured it out eventually and through some wise people that taught me, is that my emotions are my friend. I was on a cruise one time and I almost jumped over the balcony rail to go swim to an iceberg because I wasn't scared. And I said, wow, you need to be scared jumping over the rail and swimming to an iceberg. That's not a good idea. And yet I wasn't scared. I backed into the room, locked the door, because I didn't have any fear for a little bit. And there was a time in recovery where I had no fear. And that was not good, and it was not normal. But now, anxiety, fear, even depression, I'll let you figure that out, but I'll give you the answer. It took me a while to figure out why depression was good. But,
one moment.
Yeah.
What is the question number 10? So, fine. What would be 3 lessons that you learned from people in recovery?
Well, there are people that I can trust. Growing up in an alcoholic family, you can't really trust anybody. But I've got people that I would walk out of a skyscraper if they told me I was going to be okay. That's the kind of trust I have in recovery. And also trust in the program of recovery. I see people all the time that say, my life's spiraling down to death, but I'm still going to believe what I believe and not what 2 million people who have found recovery are going to tell me. So the trust that comes out of that has been helpful for me. And then just the trust in the science. So I've found that I'll keep looking. If something doesn't fit my kind of nerdy scientific mind, I just keep looking and I formulate new hypotheses and I look for new data. And that's been real helpful in evaluating some of these drugs. You know, these drugs that work for addictions, there's a new way to measure that. Our statisticians will know this. TTNN, or NNTT, number needed to treat. You know, all these drugs everybody tells you work so great. You got to give 20 people a drug before one person gets improved. I mean, I'd hang up my shingle if that's all effective. I could be treating alcoholics, but that passes muster in the FDA for a drug. And I'm so glad that I've learned those things so I can push recovery and understand. I'm a doctor, so spirituality is not my area of expertise, but I can promote spirituality because I know that when I enter a room with other people like me, or a patient does, that we're more than the sum total of people in that room. And that's not a mathematical solution, it's a spiritual solution.
Thank you. We did 10 questions in 10 minutes.
We did.
That was good, yes.
Now, is there a prize? Is there a prize for that?
Another question, the last one. What is the gift of working in recovery?
What's that?
What is the gift of working in recovery?
Well, it's kind of the gift I have to tell people I get, which is, you know, recovery and some sanity and all the good things you hear people talk about in AA and Al-Anon talks. But the real gift is I feel like there's something that's like X-ray vision that Superman has. I think I don't mean this in an arrogant way, but I can walk up against any situation in life and somehow my recovery gives me a vision that nobody else has except people in recovery to really know what's going on in the world. And I've used that gift quite a bit in the last 5 years, but it's really important. And I hope I understand it better right now.
Thank you very much for touching many lives every day and many more under. Thank you for each speaker, consortium member, in person and online participant for touching lives.
Thank
Thank you
so
so
much. It's not easy for Cosmina either. You know, there's a little language barrier, some other things, and I asked her to take the risk with me and let's do something other than a PowerPoint, because part of my goal now, she didn't ask this question, but I'm an old man, nobody wants to talk about dying, but if I can be an example of recovery, for 60 years, I mean, I've been around a long time, and I'm not bragging about it, it's just what happens when you keep coming back, and you don't die. But, you know, but an example of that, if there's one person in this audience that says, you know, I'm gonna keep coming back and try to find a way to represent the example, because I didn't invent this, I've got 24 or more heroes of mine that I'm just trying to be more like them. So thank you all for being here, and thank you for the honor and the invitation to be here serving you in recovery today. Thanks. You satisfied?